The telegram comes at 6:14, delivered by a dispatch rider whose motorcycle is still ticking as he hands you the envelope. Your fingers find the paper before your mind catches up. Imperial Seal, General Headquarters routing, priority classification. That means someone at the War Office decided this could not wait for the Morning Post. You break the seal with your thumbnail. The wax is still warm. Lieutenant Colonel Hugh Willoughby, Inspector General Medical Services, arrives for inspection October 16, 6 o'clock hours. Purpose: Regulatory Compliance Assessment per General Order 2348, August 1917. Facility Documentation Review. Patient Holding Times. Diagnostic Terminology Audit. Prepare all registers for examination. You have 48 hours. The dispatch rider is already gone. The sound of his engine fades toward the supply road. Dawn is coming up gray over the ward tents. 37 men are still sleeping, or trying to. The register sits on your desk where you left it at midnight, open to yesterday's entries. Private Thomas Catchpole, Day 21, no verbal response to stimuli, continues observation. The phrase shell shock appears twice in your private notes from last week, crossed out both times, rewritten as not yet diagnosed nervous in the official log. You did that because the August directive was clear. The Army does not recognize shell shock anymore. The Army recognizes men who can return to duty in 72 hours, and men who cannot, and nothing in between. Willoughby has closed 3 psychiatric facilities in 4 months. You know this because Captain Aldous Pierce mentioned it during a supply inspection last month. The way he mentions most things. Flat, factual, with the kind of precision that suggests he has already calculated what it means for you. Excessive retention rates. Non-compliant documentation. Facilities that hold men longer than regulation permits get audited, and audits that find discrepancies get reported to command. And command removes officers who cannot follow directives during wartime. His career advancement depends on proving forward psychiatric services are being misused. He cannot be reasoned with using clinical arguments because he does not recognize clinical authority over administrative policy. The ward is waking. You hear Warrant Officer Marsh moving between the beds, the careful footsteps of a man who has learned that sudden sounds in a room full of sleeping soldiers produce results nobody wants. Somewhere past the second tent, a man is crying. Not loudly, just the steady, exhausted rhythm of someone who has been crying for a while and will probably continue. You fold the telegram and place it in your breast pocket. The paper sits against your ribs. You will feel it there for the next 2 days. 14 men on the ward have been here longer than 72 hours. 6 have documentation that uses terminology the August directive specifically prohibited. Catchpole's regimental file has a gap where his court-martial record used to be, before someone, you do not know who, removed it from the transfer packet. You have been treating him for 3 weeks. He has not spoken in 21 days. The regulation says 3 days maximum at forward clearing units, then return to duty or transfer to base hospital if no improvement observed. Catchpole is not improving. He is also not getting worse. He sits. He eats when prompted. He does not sleep. At night he watches the tent ceiling with the steady attention of someone reading text nobody else can see. You walk to the ward tent. The air smells like carbolic soap and wool uniforms. The particular morning smell of 37 men who have been sleeping in close quarters. Marsh sees you coming and straightens. His face does not change. It never does, but his posture shifts half a degree toward attention. Sir. Inspection in 48 hours. Lieutenant Colonel Willoughby, Inspector General Medical Services. Marsh processes this. His expression remains neutral. All registers, sir. All registers. Including private notes? He didn't specify. That means yes. Marsh nods once. He does not ask what this means. He already knows. A man does not serve at a forward psychiatric clearing unit for 18 months without learning how inspections work. You inspect what you can measure. You measure what the regulations define. The regulations define success as speed, how quickly men move through the system and return to duty. Everything else is institutional failure. The sun is up now. Lamplight is no longer necessary. You can see the ward clearly. 2 rows of beds, 18 on each side, 3 empty at the far end, where yesterday's convoy took the men who were ready. Ready is a flexible term. It means men who can hold a rifle without shaking. Men who will follow orders when given. Men who understand that going back to their units is not optional, and who have decided that pretending to be functional is less frightening than being transferred to a base hospital, where the treatment protocols involve electricity and cold water, and doctors who believe that the way to cure a man of fear is to make him more afraid. Private Hendricks is awake. He watches you from his cot, eyes tracking your movement across the tent. He has been here 9 days. He will be ready tomorrow. You know this because yesterday he asked about his rifle, and when you told him it was with the quartermaster, he nodded and looked relieved instead of frightened. A man who wants his rifle back is a man who has accepted where he is going. Catchpole is also awake. He is always awake at dawn. He sits on his cot with his hands folded in his lap, posture perfect, spine straight, looking at nothing in particular. His uniform is clean. Marsh makes sure of that. A man who looks like a soldier is easier to defend in an inspection than a man who has stopped maintaining himself. You walk to Catchpole's cot. He does not look at you. His eyes are open. His breathing is regular. If you did not know better, you would think he was simply resting. Private Catchpole. No response. You have not expected one. You tried for the first week. Questions, commands, simple requests for acknowledgement. He does not respond to his name. He does not respond to touch. He responds to food by eating it when placed in front of him. He responds to cold by shivering. Everything else passes through him without leaving marks. His file is incomplete. You noticed this the day he arrived. Regimental transfer packet, medical history, service record, all present. Court-martial documentation, absent. There is a gap in the chronology, 3 weeks missing between his last recorded duty assignment and his arrival at your facility. Men do not simply disappear from the record for 3 weeks. They are detained, or hospitalized, or they are dead. Catchpole is not dead. Someone sent him to you instead of to a base hospital, which means someone at regimental command decided he was a forward clearing case, which means someone wanted him processed quickly and returned to duty without extended specialist assessment. The telegram sits against your ribs. You have 48 hours to prepare documentation for a man who has audit authority over every decision you have made since June, every diagnosis, every holding time. Every word you have written in the margins of forms designed to translate human collapse into administrative categories that permit the war to continue. Willoughby arrives with a checklist, a mandate, and the power to remove you from command if the documentation does not match the directive. He is 53 years old. He has spent 26 years in Army Medical Administration. He has never served at a front-line psychiatric facility. Marsh is waiting. The ward is waiting. October morning light comes through the tent canvas, gray and even. Somewhere past the supply depot, you hear the distant percussion of artillery. Not close. Close enough to feel in your chest as a rhythm, rather than individual detonations. The work begins now. You begin with a register. It sits on your desk in the medical tent, leather-bound, 200 pages of entries in black ink, documenting every man who has passed through this facility since April. The August directive arrived 4 months ago in the form of General Order 2348, 3 pages of institutional language, explaining that the term shell shock was no longer recognized for diagnostic purposes. The Army had determined that the condition previously described by that terminology was better understood as a temporary disruption of nervous function, requiring brief rest and immediate return to duty. Forward clearing units were instructed to document cases as not yet diagnosed nervous, pending specialist assessment. Holding times were not to exceed 72 hours, except in cases of obvious physical injury, requiring surgical intervention. The directive included a paragraph explaining that extended retention of functional soldiers at psychiatric facilities was detrimental to unit morale and operational readiness. It suggested that many cases of suspected nervous collapse were actually cases of insufficient discipline, and that the appropriate treatment was not extended rest, but immediate return to military routine under supervision of regimental medical officers. You have read this paragraph 11 times. It still means the same thing. The Army believes you are holding men who could be fighting. The sun is higher now. You work by daylight rather than lamplight, which means the page is easier to read, but also means you can see the tent canvas moving slightly in the wind, which means you are aware of time passing in a way you were not at midnight, when documentation was simply the task that followed the task of keeping men alive through the night. 46 hours remain. The register opens to October 1st. 16 days of entries. 43 admissions. 28 discharges. 15 men transferred to base hospitals when it became clear that 3 days of rest and hot food were not going to be sufficient. 37 men currently on the ward. You go through the entries one by one, checking holding times against admission dates. Private Hendricks, 9 days. Private Moss, 11 days. Private Whitmore, 14 days. Lance Corporal Davies, 16 days. The August directive permits 72 hours. You have 14 men who have exceeded that window by margins ranging from 6 days to 3 weeks. Each one represents a decision you made that Willoughby will now review. Each one requires justification in language the directive recognizes. You pull your private notes from the desk drawer. These are the observations you write at night when the official documentation is complete, the details that do not fit into the categories the forms provide. Moss. Significant tremor both hands, unable to load rifle during coordination test. Reported auditory hallucinations consistent with artillery bombardment when no shelling present. Whitmore. Acute startle response to sudden sound. 3 documented episodes of violent disruption during night. Remains oriented to person and place, but demonstrates impaired judgment regarding immediate safety. None of this translates cleanly into not yet diagnosed nervous. Condition improving. Recommend return to duty pending regimental medical officer assessment. You begin rewriting. The private notes remain in the drawer. The register receives the version that will survive inspection. Private Moss. Day 11. NYDN. Nervous symptoms moderate. Continues treatment. Reassess 48 hours. The tremor becomes nervous symptoms. The hallucinations disappear entirely. The fact that he cannot hold a rifle without dropping it becomes a clinical observation requiring continued monitoring, rather than evidence that returning him to duty would result in immediate non-function under fire. You are lying by omission. You are also telling the only truth the institution permits you to tell. A register that documents what you actually observe is a register that proves you are retaining men beyond regulation limits without sufficient cause. A register that translates observation into institutional language is a register that demonstrates compliance with the directive, while giving you room to continue treatment. Warrant Officer Marsh enters the tent. He does not knock. Knocking is for spaces with doors. Sir, Captain Pierce at the gate. Send him in. Pierce arrives 60 seconds later. He is wearing a clean uniform, which means he anticipated needing to be presentable when he decided to visit a psychiatric facility before breakfast. Pierce commands the supply depot 2 kilometers down the road. His job is logistics. managing the flow of material between the railhead and the front, ensuring that ammunition and food and medical supplies arrive where they are needed before the need becomes critical. He treats the war as a resource allocation problem. Men are one of the resources. The fact that they break is simply another variable in the equations he balances. Willoughby, Pierce says, no preamble. 48 hours. You heard. Dispatch rider stopped at the depot. I read the telegram over his shoulder. Pierce walks to the desk and looks at the register without touching it. How many are you over the limit? 14. How far over? 3 days to 3 weeks. Pierce does the calculation in his head. You can see him doing it, holding time violations multiplied by number of cases, weighed against typical inspection outcomes, converted into probability of facility closure. That's not defensible. I know. You need to discharge before he arrives, move the worst cases to base hospital, paper the rest as return to duty. Clean slate for inspection. 15 men transferred in 2 days. Looks like panic. It looks like I'm hiding something. You are hiding something. Not from Willoughby. From the system that requires me to pretend I can cure a man's nervous collapse in 72 hours, when the textbook says 6 weeks minimum, and my own observation says 6 months if he's lucky. Pierce sits on the edge of the desk. He does not ask permission. The system doesn't care what the textbook says. The calculation is clear. You have been assigned a function, and you are not performing it at the required speed. Willoughby isn't coming here to assess whether your treatment works. He's coming to assess whether you are following orders. The orders are clinically insane. Yes. So I should falsify discharge dates and transfer 14 men to facilities that can't help them any more than I can, because that demonstrates I understand the chain of command. You should demonstrate you understand the chain of command, Pierce says, because the alternative is that Willoughby removes you and replaces you with someone who will discharge everyone currently on the ward within 72 hours of inspection, regardless of condition, and then you are not here to help anyone. You do not respond immediately. The register sits between you. Outside, the ward is waking fully now. Voices, movement, the morning routine of men who have learned that routine is one of the few things that still make sense. What do you need? Pierce asks. I need the court-martial file for Private Thomas Catchpole. His transfer packet is incomplete. When did he arrive? 3 weeks ago, September 24th. From which regiment? 15th Lancashire Fusiliers. I'll send a runner to regimental headquarters. If the file exists, I'll have it by tomorrow morning. What if it doesn't exist? Then you have a larger problem than holding time violations, Pierce stands. Discharge who you can, transfer who you must, keep who you can defend. And for God's sake, make sure your register uses the correct terminology. Willoughby is the kind of man who counts words. He leaves. You return to the register. The morning passes in revision. By midday you have rewritten 16 entries. The clinical observations remain in your private notes. The official register now documents a facility that is marginally slow but fundamentally compliant. Men receiving brief rest, showing gradual improvement, pending return to duty or specialist transfer as appropriate. The gaps between what the register says and what you know could be written in their own volume. You do not write that volume. You write the version that survives. At 1300 hours, you walk the ward. Hendricks is ready. You will discharge him tomorrow. Moss is not ready, but you will classify him as NYDN. Stable. Recommend return to light duty pending regimental medical officer clearance. That gives his commanding officer the option to keep him off the line for another week, while maintaining the fiction that he is fit for service. You pass a cot where a private you discharged last week left his canteen behind. The water inside has gone stale, but someone, probably Marsh, has filled it anyway, placed it beside a replacement blanket for the next man who arrives needing both. Small arithmetic of care. Catchpole sits on his cot. He has not moved since dawn. His hands are still folded. His eyes are still open. You have no idea what he sees. 43 hours remain. The second night is worse than the first. Not because anything changes on the ward, but because you now have a precise count of everything that can destroy you. And the counting does not stop when you close the register. 14 men over the holding limit, 6 entries in your private notes using prohibited terminology, 1 incomplete file with a missing court-martial record, 37 lives that depend on this facility remaining operational. And Lieutenant Colonel Hugh Willoughby, who has built a career on proving that forward psychiatric services are being misused by officers who lack the institutional discipline to enforce regulations during wartime. He arrives in 40 hours carrying audit authority from General Headquarters. His advancement depends on closure rates. You sit at your desk after midnight. The lamp burns steady. Outside, the ward is quiet. The particular weighted silence of men pretending to sleep, because sleep is what the schedule requires, even when sleep is not available. The artillery is still audible. A low rhythmic pressure at the edge of hearing. Not close, close enough. The vulnerability assessment begins with the register. You open it to June, the month Willoughby's audit authority begins. 4 months of entries. 137 admissions. 91 discharges to duty. 28 transfers to base hospital. 18 deaths. Mostly men who arrived with physical injuries severe enough that psychiatric assessment was secondary to the fact that they were bleeding. You go through each entry looking for patterns Willoughby will notice. Average holding time, 6.4 days. Regulation maximum, 3 days. Discrepancy, 113% over target. That number will appear in his report. You can see it already. A single figure that summarizes 4 months of clinical decisions as a failure of institutional compliance. The terminology audit is worse. You pull your private notes and count the prohibited phrases. Shell shock appears 43 times between June and September, before you learn to stop writing it even in personal documentation. Nervous collapse appears 18 times. Mental breakdown appears 7 times. These are the phrases the August directive specifically banned. The Army now recognizes only not yet diagnosed nervous, a term so carefully non-committal that it means everything and nothing simultaneously. You begin a second register. This one is not official. This one documents everything the official register cannot say. Moss cannot load rifle due to sustained tremor. Whitmore, violent startle response, makes him a danger to his unit under fire. Davies, dissociative episodes, during which he does not recognize his own name. Catchpole, mute, unresponsive, present in body but absent in every meaningful sense. This register will not survive inspection. You know this. You write it anyway, because if Willoughby closes this facility, someone needs to know what was actually happening here. Someone needs to have a record that is not written in the language of institutional fiction. Marsh enters at 2:30. He is carrying tea. He sets it on your desk without speaking, then waits. How many can we move before he arrives, you ask? Depends on where you're moving them. Base hospital transfers. Men who need specialist care I cannot provide. 5, maybe 6. More than that. And it looks like we're clearing the ward for inspection. We are clearing the ward for inspection. Yes, sir. But it has to look like normal transfer protocol, not panic. You drink the tea. It is still hot. Marsh makes tea the way he does everything else. Efficiently, without commentary, producing results that meet the minimum standard required. The fact that he is here at 2:30 with tea means he knows you are not sleeping. The fact that he does not mention this means he understands that acknowledging it would serve no purpose. Private Catchpole, you say. Sir, if his court-martial file does not arrive before inspection, what story do we tell? Marsh considers this. His face does not change. We tell the truth. Transfer packet was incomplete when he arrived. We requested the missing documents from regimental headquarters. We are still waiting. That makes it regimental command's failure, not ours. Yes, sir. Willoughby will ask why we accepted an incomplete transfer. Because the man was already here and needed immediate treatment. Rejecting him would have required sending him back to his regiment without assessment, which violates the same directive Willoughby is here to enforce. You look at Marsh. He looks back. His expression is neutral, his posture is correct. He has been at this facility for 19 months. He has seen 4 inspections. He knows how these conversations work. You've done this before, you say. Every facility does this, sir. Compliance is a performance. We are preparing the performance. He leaves. The tea grows cold. You return to the register. By dawn you have a plan. It is not a good plan. It is the least bad option available, when all options involve choosing which men to sacrifice to preserve the system that is killing them. 5 transfers to base hospital. Men whose conditions require specialist treatment you cannot provide. Men whose presence on the ward past the regulation window cannot be justified without admitting that forward clearing units are holding cases that belong in long-term care facilities. This removes 5 of the 14 compliance violations. The remaining 9 will require documentation proving they were improving too slowly to discharge but not severely enough to transfer. The narrow band of marginal cases the regulations technically permit. 6 discharges to duty. Men who can hold a rifle, follow orders and maintain the appearance of function long enough to pass regimental medical officer assessment. This includes Hendricks. This includes Moss, who still cannot load his rifle without shaking, but who has learned to hide the shaking well enough that you can classify him as NYD, N, stable, functional for light duty pending continued monitoring. You are sending men back to the machinery that broke them. You know this. You write the discharge orders anyway, because keeping them on the ward past inspection means Willoughby closes the facility and everyone goes back immediately, with no documentation protecting them at all. Catchpole remains. You cannot discharge him. You cannot transfer him without a complete file. He sits in the center of your vulnerability like a stone in still water, present, immovable, creating ripples in every direction. The sun comes up. 39 hours remain. You fold the second register and place it in the drawer beneath the official register. Then you walk to the ward to begin telling men they are leaving. Hendricks takes it well. He nods when you tell him he is discharged to duty, returns to his cot, begins packing his kit with the mechanical precision of someone who has been preparing for this moment. He knows what going back means. He has decided it is preferable to the alternatives. Moss does not take it well. His hands start shaking when you tell him. He looks at his hands like they belong to someone else, then looks at you. I'm not ready, sir. You're stable, functional for light duty. Your commanding officer will monitor your condition. I can't hold my rifle. You'll continue treatment at regimental level. This facility is for acute cases requiring immediate intervention. You no longer meet that criteria. Moss stares at you. He is 23 years old. He has been at the front for 14 months. He knows what you are actually saying. You are saying I am sending you back because keeping you here will get this facility closed, and a closed facility helps no one. He does not argue. He returns to his cot. His hands are still shaking. You finish the ward rounds by 9 o'clock. 5 men are being transferred to base hospital this afternoon. 6 men are being discharged to duty tomorrow morning. 9 men remain who exceed the regulation window but whose documentation you can defend. Catchpole remains in a category of his own. Present, silent, unresolved. Pierce arrives at 10 o'clock with a dispatch case. Regimental Headquarters, 15th Lancashire Fusiliers. He hands you the case. This is everything they have on Private Thomas Catchpole. You open the case. Inside, service record, medical history, transfer orders. No court-martial file. That's all they sent? That's all they have. The duty officer said Catchpole's disciplinary record is listed as sealed pending review. He wouldn't say what that means. You close the case, sealed pending review. That phrase appears in military documentation when a case involves command-level decisions that are not ready for permanent record. It means someone at battalion or brigade level decided Catchpole's court-martial was a problem that required special handling. What do I tell Willoughby when he asks? You tell him the file is sealed pending review and you have requested access through proper channels. He'll want to know why I accepted an incomplete transfer. You'll tell him the man was already here and denying him treatment would have violated medical protocol. Pierce leaves. You place the dispatch case on your desk next to the register. 38 hours remain. The afternoon convoy arrives at 1400. 3 trucks carrying wounded from the line. 2 men with shrapnel injuries who belong at the surgical unit. 1 man who is screaming. You take the one who is screaming. His name is Private Daniels. He is 19 years old. He cannot stop shaking. He tells you that the ground opened up beneath his section and swallowed 6 men, and he watched them disappear into the mud, and he can still hear them screaming underneath the earth when everything is quiet. You give him hot food, you give him a cot. You write his name in the register, Private Daniels, Day 1, NYDN. Acute distress following combat exposure, continue observation. 38 men on the ward now. You have 3 days to decide whether Daniels belongs to the category of men who can recover with rest, or the category of men who will never recover, or the category of men who exist in between, and who require someone to lie convincingly on their behalf. The lamp burns through the second night you do not sleep. 36 hours remain. The form itself is 6 inches by 4, ivory cardstock with regimental header and 3 entry fields. Name, unit, diagnosis. Not yet diagnosed nervous is not a diagnosis. It is what you write when the army has forbidden you from writing shell shock, neurasthenia, psychasthenia, hysteria, or any other term that implies the war itself produces psychiatric casualties at industrial scale. The August directive was clear. Men presenting with unexplained paralysis, mutism, tremor, or night terror are to be documented as NYDN and held for specialist assessment, not diagnosed at clearing station level by officers whose training consists of 6 weeks at Magul and a posting to a tent 3 miles from the guns. The directive assumes specialists exist, assumes transfer capacity exists, assumes the 72-hour window between initial presentation and specialist assessment is long enough to distinguish between exhaustion that responds to hot food and damage that requires months at Craig Lockhart under Dr. W.H.R. Rivers' care. You have been working under this directive since August. It is now October 14th. The specialist assessments have not materialized. The transfer capacity has not appeared. The men keep arriving. Lieutenant Colonel Hugh Willoughby arrives in 36 hours to audit whether you understand the difference between clinical observation and regulatory compliance. Private Thomas Catchpole's admission form reads, Name Timothy Name Catchpole T. Timothy Unit 9th Battalion Royal Fusiliers. Knife's diagnosis NYDN. The form is correct according to regulation. The form is also worthless as a medical document. Catchpole has not spoken in 3 weeks. His hands do not shake. His eyes track movement. He eats when food is placed in front of him. He does not sleep. Every night at 2200 he stands beside his cot and remains there until dawn, motionless, facing the canvas wall. Warrant Officer Marsh reports this in the morning log with the clinical precision of a man who has learned that noting unusual behavior without attempting to interpret it is the only documentation style that survives audit. The problem is not the NYDN form, the problem is the second set of notes. You keep them in a separate ledger, brown leather, no regimental markings. Clinical observations recorded in language that would get you removed from duty if the Inspector General discovered them. IV selective mutism, probable precipitating trauma. Dissociative state, intact orientation to environment. Prolonged immobility with preserved consciousness, catatonic features without stupor. The terms are from Rivers. Work at Mahal. The terms are prohibited under the August Directive. The terms are the only accurate description of what you are observing. The calculation is immediate. Willoughby arrives in 36 hours to audit regulatory compliance. Compliance means NYDN forms with nothing written beyond the 3 required fields. Compliance means no specialist terminology in forward medical records. Compliance means no documentation suggesting you are attempting psychiatric diagnosis, rather than performing triage and transfer. Your clinical ledger contains 47 entries using prohibited terminology. 14 entries correspond to men still on the ward. 6 describe conditions that cannot be summarized as NYDN, without rendering the documentation medically meaningless. The 1917 equivalent of wiping your hard drive before IT arrives to investigate why you've been storing files in the wrong folder system. Except IT has the authority to court-martial you for the wrong folder system, and the files are men whose treatment depends on someone writing down what is actually wrong with them. You sit at the desk in the medical tent at 7:30 with both ledgers open. The NYDN forms are regulation compliant and clinically useless. The clinical notes are accurate and institutionally forbidden. 48 hours is not enough time to reconcile the gap. It never was. The lamp hisses. The tent canvas shifts in wind that smells of latrine lime and wet wool. Somewhere past the eastern perimeter, a convoy is forming up for the morning supply run. Willoughby has closed 3 psychiatric facilities in 4 months for documentation that looked exactly like yours. You close both ledgers. The decision is not whether to destroy the clinical notes. The decision is whether destroying them changes anything for the men whose conditions they describe. Whether Catchpole's treatment improves or worsens based on what you have written in a ledger the Army has told you not to keep. The answer is, you do not know yet. You will not know until Willoughby finishes his inspection, and you discover whether accurate documentation protected anyone, or simply provided evidence for your own removal. 36 hours to decide which version of the truth survives contact with institutional audit. The register sits on the desk beside the ledgers. 300 entries since April. Every man who passed through this facility documented in ink that cannot be retracted. You reach for it, then stop. Not yet. There are still men on the ward who need the morning round completed before you begin deciding what disappears. Pierce finds you at the field kitchen at 8:15, 2 hours after dawn round. He does not salute. Officers this close to the line have learned that gestures of hierarchy draw sniper attention, and the habit remains even inside the wire when no one is watching. The convoy manifest has a problem, Pierce says. He is holding a clipboard. The manifest is a single sheet listing 16 names. 8 transfer cases bound for base hospital at Etaples, 8 returning to battalion after 72-hour observation. The problem is not immediately obvious. You take the clipboard, scan the names. Dawson, Pierce says, line 6. Private R. Dawson, listed for return to 11th Battalion, King's Liverpool Regiment. Held 4 days. Admitted October 10th with acute exhaustion and night terror, no physical injury. Documented as NYDN in the official register. Documented in your clinical ledger as probable acute stress reaction with sympathetic nervous activation. You do not need to check the ledger to remember that Dawson's night terror resolved after 36 hours of rest, but his hands still shake when artillery sounds in the distance, and you recommended extending observation to confirm stability before return to frontline duty. He is still symptomatic, you say. He is past regulation holding time, Pierce says. The convoy leaves at 10 o'clock. If his name is not on the return manifest, The battalion reports it as a casualty transfer. That triggers a regimental investigation into why a man admitted for exhaustion is being sent to base hospital instead of returning to his unit. The calculation is immediate. Every man transferred to base hospital instead of returned to battalion becomes a statistic. Too many statistics, and the facility appears to be generating psychiatric casualties, rather than treating minor cases at forward level. Generate enough statistics, and General Headquarters begins asking whether forward psychiatric services are being used to protect malingerers from frontline duty. Willoughby's audit will review every transfer decision since August. His career advancement depends on proving that forward psychiatric services are being misused by officers who lack institutional discipline. 34 hours now. Dawson's hands shake, you say. Not according to the NYDN form, Pierce says. The form lists no symptoms beyond the initial presentation. Subsequent observations are recorded in the clinical ledger, not the official documentation. The official documentation shows a man admitted for exhaustion, who rested for 4 days and should now return to duty. Pierce waits. He does not argue. He does not explain. He simply holds the clipboard and lets you work through the mathematics of what happens if Dawson returns to battalion still symptomatic, and what happens if he is transferred to base hospital, and Willoughby asks why a man documented with exhaustion required specialist care. The choice is, send Dawson back knowing his hands still shake, or transfer him knowing the transfer itself becomes evidence during inspection that you are holding men beyond regulation limits for conditions that do not require specialist intervention. The manifest stands, you say. Pierce nods, takes the clipboard, does not ask whether you are certain. He is not paid to verify your clinical judgment. He is paid to coordinate logistics between your facility and the 9 battalions whose casualties pass through this clearing station, and to warn you when clinical decisions produce administrative problems that will not become obvious until someone from General Headquarters arrives to audit the documentation. He turns to leave, then stops. Catchpole's file, Pierce says. You wait. The regimental records arrived this morning, Pierce says. There is a gap. Court-martial proceedings are referenced in the August summary, but the file itself was not included in the transfer packet. Court-martial proceedings. The words sit in the space between you like a live shell that has not yet detonated. What was the charge, you say? Not specified, Pierce says. The reference is an administrative note. See attached CM file. No file was attached. Men are court-martialed for 3 categories of offense at this stage of the war: desertion, self-inflicted wounds, and refusal of lawful orders under combat conditions. Desertion and self-inflicted wounds result in documented sentences. Refusal of orders results in field execution or commutation to penal battalion. Catchpole is on your ward, not in a penal battalion, not executed. The August summary should specify disposition, you say. It does not, Pierce says. The entry ends with the court-martial reference. The September summary begins with his transfer to your facility following admission for mutism. No sentence recorded. No disposition. Just the gap where the file should be. The gap where someone removed documentation that would explain why a man court-martialed for unknown charges in August is now a psychiatric casualty in October, instead of a prisoner or a corpse. Can you request the file from regimental archives, you say? I can, Pierce says. It will take 4 days minimum, more likely a week. 34 hours until Willoughby begins his inspection. 4 days minimum to retrieve a file that may no longer exist. 1 week to discover whether the gap in Catchpole's record is an administrative error or evidence of something that requires the documentation to stay missing. Request it, you say. Pierce nods, leaves without further comment. The field kitchen is empty now except for the orderly scrubbing pots in water that steams in the cold morning air. The smell is lye soap and wood smoke. The sound is metal on metal, rhythmic, purposeful. A dispatch rider's motorcycle coughs to life somewhere near the signals tent. 34 hours. Dawson returns to battalion with hands that shake. Catchpole remains on the ward with a file that does not explain why he is here instead of somewhere else. Willoughby arrives to audit whether your facility is following regulations designed to return men to duty faster than damage accumulates. You leave the kitchen. Walk back toward the medical tent. The mud sucks at your boots with each step. The private notes are where you make the choice. Not the official register, which records only what the Army permits. Not the clinical ledger, which records what actually happens. The private notes are the third documentation system, kept in a single notebook with no markings, filed in your quarters rather than the medical tent. They contain observations that cannot be written anywhere else. Life Catchpole, Regimental CO refused transfer request. Stated soldier does not require specialist care. Admission followed battalion medical officer override citing acute mutism. CO's refusal note not included in transfer packet. Knife Catchpole, court-martial reference in file with no attached proceedings. August summary ends before disposition. Pattern suggests documentation removal, not administrative error. Doimes Catchpole, night standing behavior consistent with sentry duty posture. Duration exceeds fatigue-based explanation. Suggests trauma-linked behavioral loop timber. The observations are clinical, the implications are not. Men are not transferred to psychiatric clearing stations against their commanding officer's judgment, unless something about their condition makes retention at battalion level impossible. Men are not court-martialed without disposition, unless the disposition itself is something the Army prefers not to document. Men do not stand facing a wall every night for 3 weeks, because they are tired. Catchpole is not a psychiatric casualty being treated at forward level according to regulation. Catchpole is evidence of something that requires specific documentation to stay missing, and you have spent 3 weeks writing down everything the official records omit. The notebook sits on the desk in your quarters at 11:30, 32 hours before inspection begins. The tent is cold. The lamp burns with the smell of paraffin and metal fatigue. You flip to the Catchpole pages, 6 entries spanning 3 weeks. Each entry records details that would require explanation if discovered during audit. The question is not whether the entries are accurate. The question is whether their accuracy protects Catchpole or destroys him. If Willoughby finds the notebook and reads the court-martial documentation gap, he will ask questions the regimental command structure has already decided not to answer. If he finds the observations about Catchpole's night-standing behavior, he will ask why a man displaying obvious psychiatric symptoms has been held for 3 weeks, instead of transferred to specialist care within 72 hours as regulation requires. Willoughby cannot be reasoned with using clinical arguments because he does not recognize clinical authority over administrative policy. The answer to the first question implicates whoever removed Catchpole's court-martial file. The answer to the second question implicates you for holding a patient beyond regulation limits, while documenting the clinical necessity in notes you were never authorized to keep. You sit with that for a long time. The choice is simple in its construction: burn the notebook before Willoughby arrives, or keep it and trust that documentation protects more than it destroys. The choice is impossible in its implications, because Catchpole's treatment after inspection depends on whether someone can prove his condition requires specialist care rather than disciplinary action, and the only proof is in notes that establish you have been conducting psychiatric assessment in violation of the August Directive that restricts diagnostic authority to specialist facilities. The lamp hisses. Outside the tent, boots crunch through gravel toward the ward, Marsh making his midday round. 43 men breathing in controlled rows, 14 of them held beyond the 72 hours the Army considers sufficient for forward psychiatric care. 14 men whose files Willoughby will review one by one. You close the notebook, do not burn it, not yet. 32 hours to decide whether evidence is protection or liability. Whether documentation that tells the truth serves the men it describes, or simply provides the institutional record of failure that justifies your removal. The answer depends on what Willoughby is looking for when he arrives, whether he is assessing clinical competence or institutional compliance, whether he measures success by patient outcomes or processing speed. You do not know yet. You will not know until he asks his first question, and you hear which version of reality he considers authoritative. The notebook stays on the desk. The entries remain intact. For now. The first entry removed is Private William Moss, 12 days on the ward, diagnosed with neurasthenia secondary to prolonged exposure to artillery bombardment. In his private notes, documented as not yet diagnosed nervous in the register. The revision takes 18 seconds. You draw a single line through neurasthenia in black ink, firm enough to obscure, light enough to leave the word readable if someone holds the page to lamplight at the correct angle. Above it, in the same hand, same ink, you write, persistent tremor, etiology unconfirmed. The language is not inaccurate. The tremor is persistent. The etiology is, officially, unconfirmed. You move to the next entry. The medical tent is quiet at 14:20, the ward rounds completed, the afternoon convoy not yet arrived. Marsh is supervising the field kitchen. The orderlies are changing bedding in Ward 2. You have the register, the private notes, and 31 hours before Willoughby's inspection begins. The second entry is Lance Corporal Ames, documented with acute anxiety neurosis following frontline service. The phrase is precise. It is also prohibited. You strike it, replace it with sleep disturbance cause under investigation. 3 words that mean nothing and everything. The third entry is Private Holloway. The fourth is Corporal Staines. The fifth is Private Davies, whose hands shake badly enough that he cannot hold a rifle, whose file notes describe traumatic neurosis following exposure to gas attack, whose official diagnosis now reads muscular spasm, origin unclear. You do not pause between entries. The work requires momentum. If you stop to consider what you are erasing, you will not finish before the inspection, and unfinished revision is worse than no revision at all. The men on the ward do not know you are doing this. They would not understand the language even if you explained it. They know they cannot sleep, cannot stop shaking, cannot return to their units without collapsing. The words in the register do not change that. The words determine only whether the facility stays open long enough to treat the next convoy. Willoughby has closed 3 psychiatric facilities in the last 4 months. The documentation pattern was identical in each case. Terminology violations, excessive retention rates, clinical authority asserted over administrative policy. He arrives with a checklist and mandate from General Headquarters. The register is the first thing he will examine. By 1540, you have revised 14 files. The private notes remain intact in the locked drawer of your desk. Everything you observed, everything Rivers would recognize as clinically accurate, stays there. The register now contains only what the August directive permits: vague somatic complaints, inconclusive observations, the language of uncertainty applied to conditions you diagnosed weeks ago. The sound of boots on duckboard outside does not interrupt the work. You glance up long enough to confirm it is an orderly passing, not Marsh returning early, then continue. Private Yates, Private Cornish, Lance Corporal Webb. The arithmetic is clear. Willoughby will audit retention times first, terminology second. If the language is clean and the holding periods borderline acceptable, he may not examine the cases closely enough to notice that persistent tremor and acute anxiety neurosis describe the same presentation using different institutional vocabularies. You close the register at 1610, 14 entries revised, 23 remain. The next task is Pierce. Captain Aldous Pierce arrives at 16:30 with a formal requisition for medical supplies and an expression suggesting he has been sent to deliver it rather than writing it himself. He is 24, transferred from a line regiment 8 weeks ago, assigned to liaise between the psychiatric unit and the Forward Medical Coordination Office. He salutes precisely at the tent entrance. "Captain Pierce," you say, returning the salute, "come in." He enters, places the requisition on your desk with the care of someone handling a document he does not fully understand, and remains standing. The requisition lists items you submitted requests for in September: gauze, iodine, morphine syrettes, standard medical kit replenishment. The quantities are reduced by 30%. The delivery timeline is marked, subject to availability. "I submitted this 6 weeks ago," you say. "Yes, sir," Pierce says. "The delay is due to priority adjustments following the offensive preparations. The coordination office wanted me to confirm the quantities are still needed." You look at the revised numbers. Enough to maintain current operations. Not enough to expand capacity if the next convoy brings cases beyond the 14-bed ward limit. "The quantities are still needed," you say. "Are they approved?" "Pending the inspection outcome," Pierce says. "Lieutenant Colonel Willoughby's recommendations will determine allocation for the next quarter." The sentence is delivered neutrally, but you hear the structure beneath it. If Willoughby recommends closure, the supplies are redirected. If he recommends reduced capacity, the allocation is cut proportionally. The requisition approval depends on proving the facility is worth supplying. "I see," you say. Pierce shifts his weight slightly. "The coordination office also asked me to confirm the current bed occupancy and average retention time for their records." You close the register on your desk before answering. 14 patients currently on the ward. Average retention time is 8 days. Both figures are accurate. Neither is complete. The 14 patients include 3 men held past the 72-hour regulation. The average retention time is calculated across all patients, including those held for observation only, which brings the number down to something defensible. If Pierce asks for the breakdown, you will provide it. If he does not ask, you will not volunteer details that complicate a simple data request. "Thank you, sir," Pierce says. "I'll report that to the coordination office." He does not ask for the breakdown. You hand him back the requisition. Inform them the supplies are needed regardless of inspection outcome. The work continues either way. "Yes, sir." Pierce salutes again, turns to leave, then pauses at the tent entrance. "Captain," he says, "is there anything else the coordination office should know before the inspection?" The question is careful. He is asking whether you need him to communicate something unofficially, whether there is context the office should have that is not in the formal reports. He is offering to carry a message without being asked directly. You consider it. Pierce is young enough to believe the coordination office might intervene on clinical grounds. He has not yet learned that medical coordination and medical administration operate on different mandates, or that Willoughby's authority supersedes both. "No," you say. "Thank you, Captain." He nods, leaves. You return to the register. The next entry is Corporal Finch. Documented with war neurosis in the private notes, now recorded as exhaustion, unspecified origin in the official file. The revision takes 12 seconds. You have 30 hours and 27 minutes before the inspection begins, and 23 entries remaining. The younger officers still believe the system responds to reasonable requests, clearly stated. They learn otherwise during their first contested audit. Pierce will learn it when Willoughby closes or restructures the facility regardless of occupancy, requisition status, or clinical outcomes. You draw a line through the next diagnosis. The lamplight flickers once, steadies. Warrant Officer Marsh returns at 18:05 with the convoy manifest and a problem. He stands in the doorway of the medical tent, manifest folded in one hand, and waits until you look up from the register before speaking. "Sir," he says, "we have a request from the field ambulance. They want confirmation of available capacity before loading tonight's cases. You close the register. How many cases? 4, Marsh says. 3 from the line, 1 reassigned from a clearing station that's closing down ahead of schedule. 4 cases arriving tonight means 18 patients on a 14-bed ward. The overage requires either discharging 2 current patients early or documenting an occupancy violation before Willoughby's inspection. What's the condition breakdown, you ask? Marsh unfolds the manifest. 2 marked NYDN, 1 marked exhaustion following frontline service. The reassigned case is documented as persistent tremor, no combat exposure noted. The terminology is clean. The field ambulance is already writing around the August directive. If they are sending cases documented as not yet diagnosed nervous and exhaustion, it means they cannot hold them longer without violating their own retention limits. What's the timeline on the closing station, you ask? They're evacuating all patients by midnight, Marsh says. Willoughby's inspection there concluded this morning. The station failed the audit. The room is quiet for 4 seconds. Failed on what grounds, you ask? Terminology violations and excessive retention rates, Marsh says. The station commander was relieved. The patients are being redistributed to facilities still under review. The failed facility is the 3rd closure in 4 months. Willoughby is working north along the line, inspecting each psychiatric clearing station in sequence. The ones that fail send their patients to the next station on the list, increasing the occupancy and retention pressure until that facility also violates the regulation. You stand, move to the map on the tent wall. The failed station is marked 12 kilometers south. The next station on Willoughby's route is here. Confirm available capacity, you say. We'll take the 4 cases. Marsh does not move. Sir, that puts us at 18 patients with the inspection beginning tomorrow morning. I'm aware, you say. The regulation maximum is 14 beds, Marsh says. Willoughby will document the overage in the first 10 minutes. Then we discharge 2 patients before he arrives, you say. Who's closest to fitness for return? Marsh pulls a second sheet from his jacket pocket, already prepared. Private Yates and Lance Corporal Webb, both admitted 8 days ago, both documented as improved. Webb still has intermittent tremor. Yates has nightmares, but they're decreasing in frequency. Improved is not fit for duty. Decreasing in frequency is not resolved. You documented both men as requiring another 5 days minimum before return, noted in the private files. Prepare discharge papers for both, you say. Effective 6 o'clock tomorrow, before the inspection begins. Marsh folds the sheet, places it back in his pocket. Yes, sir. He turns to leave, then stops. Captain, the field ambulance is waiting for confirmation. If we can't take the 4 cases tonight, they'll have to hold them past their own retention limit or send them back to the line. The choice is operational. Take the cases and document an occupancy violation that lasts 6 hours before being resolved, or refuse the cases and send exhausted men back to units that cannot manage them. Confirm capacity, you say. We take them tonight. Yes, sir, Marsh says. He leaves. You return to the register. 18 patients on a 14-bed ward for 6 hours, resolved by discharging 2 men who need 5 more days of treatment. The arithmetic balances if Willoughby inspects the current occupancy and does not examine the discharge timing closely enough to notice the pattern. Private Yates is 20 years old. Lance Corporal Webb is 31. Both will return to their units tomorrow morning with paperwork documenting improvement and fitness for duty. Both will probably remain functional long enough to avoid immediate breakdown. What happens after that depends on factors you cannot control from a clearing station 12 kilometers behind the line. The convoy arrives at 2200. You will be there when they unload. The lamplight stays steady. Outside you hear the field kitchen being cleaned, the orderlies preparing Ward 2 for new arrivals, the distant sound of artillery fire continuing its rhythm to the north. The work continues. You call the briefing at 2000, because that is when the ward is quietest, and the men who need to hear this can be spared from other tasks. Sergeant Major Trent arrives first, then the two orderlies who work the night rotation, then Warrant Officer Marsh carrying a clipboard he does not need but brought anyway, because formality is how he processes information. The medical tent is cold. The lamp on the desk throws shadows that move when anyone shifts position. You do not offer tea because there is no time, and because what you are about to say does not improve with comfort. Lieutenant Colonel Willoughby arrives at dawn, you say, Inspector General Medical Services. He will audit every entry in the register, every form, filed since June, and every man currently on the ward. Trent's expression does not change. Marsh writes something on the clipboard. The directive from August bans the term shell shock in all documentation. You continue. Men are to be recorded as not yet diagnosed nervous until specialist assessment. Treatment at forward clearing units is limited to 72 hours. After that, return to duty or transfer to base hospital. One of the orderlies, Private Hayes, shifts his weight. We've got 14 over 72 hours, sir. I know. You do not elaborate. The number is not new information to anyone in this tent. Willoughby has closed 3 facilities in 4 months for non-compliance, you say. His authority comes from General Headquarters. If he finds documentation that contradicts the directive, he can remove me from command and shut down this unit. Silence. The lamp flickers once. What do we do? Hayes asks. You maintain the ward exactly as you have been maintaining it, you say. Morning rounds at 6:30, meal service on schedule. Documentation completed in ink, no corrections, no annotations that are not regulation. If Willoughby asks you a question, answer it precisely and do not volunteer information he did not request. Marsh looks up from the clipboard. The files, sir, are being reviewed. You meet his gaze. Your job is the ward, my job is the files. Trent speaks for the first time, and if he asks about specific patients, refer him to me. You pause. If I am not available, refer him to Captain Pierce. Do not attempt to explain treatment decisions. Do not offer clinical opinions. Willoughby is not here to assess the quality of care. He is here to assess regulatory compliance. The distinction matters. You can see them processing it. Outside, a convoy rattles past on the main road. Supplies moving forward. The sound reminds everyone that the line is 3 miles north, and the ward does not pause for inspections. Questions. Hayes raises a hand slightly. Private Catchpole, sir. If he asks about him specifically, refer to me. Your tone does not allow negotiation. Catchpole's case is not a ward staff matter. Another silence. This one longer. Anything else? No one speaks. Dismissed. They file out. Marsh last, still carrying the clipboard. You hear their boots on the duckboards outside. Then nothing but the artillery throb that never stops, and the sound of 30 men breathing in the ward tent 20 yards away. 28 hours remain. The files spread across the desk look identical until you compare them against the directive's language line by line. Then the discrepancies emerge like objects materializing in fog. Form AMS 14, admission documentation, 14 entries record men held beyond 72 hours. The regulation permits only transfer notation after that interval, no exceptions listed, no provision for incomplete recovery. You have been documenting clinical judgment. The directive requires administrative compliance. Private Thomas Catchpole's file sits separate from the others. 6 weeks documented. Daily notes in your handwriting describing dissociative episodes, acute nightmares, periods of non-responsiveness lasting 4 to 8 hours. The clinical picture is precise. The regulation does not care about clinical pictures. The lamp throws heat against your face. Your eyes ache from reading the same language repeatedly, searching for an interpretation that allows both adequate treatment and regulatory survival. There is none. The directive's author, someone at General Headquarters who has never treated a psychiatric casualty, assumed that 72 hours provides sufficient time to distinguish malingering from genuine distress. They assumed that men either recover or require specialist intervention within that window. They assumed treatment decisions could be reduced to a flowchart. You have been working in the space between those assumptions and what actually happens to traumatized men. That space is now forbidden. A sound outside, boots on duckboards, then silence, the sentry changing position. You glance at your watch, 2:17. In 4 hours the sky will lighten and Willoughby's convoy will arrive, and every page on this desk will become evidence. You pick up the first file. Corporal Davies, held 8 days, nightmares diminishing but still present. You read the admission notes you wrote, the daily observations, the notation that transfer to base hospital would require 3-day transport, during which no psychiatric support would be available. The regulation sees 8 days. It does not see the man. You set Davies, file aside and pick up the next. Private Howell, 12 days. Severe startle response to artillery fire. Improving but not yet safe to return to frontline duty. Sergeant Brennan, 9 days. Hallucinations resolved, but lingering dissociation requiring supervised reorientation. Each file tells the same story. You held them, because releasing them earlier would have been clinical malpractice. The regulation requires you to commit clinical malpractice on a schedule. The artillery rumbles. 3 miles north, men are dying. Some of them will arrive here tomorrow with shattered nerves, and the expectation that someone will help them stabilize before throwing them back into the machinery. You will have 72 hours. After that, the regulation says they are malingering or someone else's responsibility. You know what Rivers would do. Dr. W.H.R. Rivers at Craiglockhart has 8 weeks minimum with each patient, sometimes 16. He works in Edinburgh with officer patients and government funding and the luxury of time. You work 3 miles from the front with enlisted men and a 72-hour countdown. The systems are not comparable. Willoughby will not care. You pick up Catchpole's file again. The pages have become familiar through repeated reading. June 3rd admission, acute dissociative state following 22 days continuous frontline duty. Initial assessment, severe traumatic neurosis, prognosis, uncertain. 6 weeks later, significant improvement, nightmares decreasing, dissociative episodes less frequent, still not fit for duty, still requiring treatment. The regulation gives you 3 days. You took 42. The choice now is whether to defend that decision or erase the evidence. You have been staring at these pages for 6 hours, and the answer has not changed. You cannot erase the evidence because the evidence is also the record of care. If you falsify the dates, you abandon the documentation that proves these men received treatment. If Willoughby finds falsified records, he will not just close the unit. He will court-martial you. The alternative is to present accurate documentation and defend clinical judgment against administrative policy. You know how that ends. You have heard what happened to Major Hartley at the clearing station near Arras, removed from command for exceeding retention guidelines, reassigned to supply duties, his psychiatric unit disbanded, and his patients dispersed to facilities that could not accommodate them. 3 of those patients died by suicide within a month. The lamp flickers. The oil is running low. You stand and walk to the tent entrance. The night air is cold and smells of mud and antiseptic, and the latrine trench 50 yards east. The sky is overcast. No stars. The artillery glow on the horizon pulses like a heartbeat. In 3 hours and 40 minutes, the sun will rise. In 4 hours and 30 minutes, Lieutenant Colonel Hugh Willoughby will arrive. You return to the desk. The files remain exactly as you left them. 14 men held past regulation. 1 man held 6 weeks. All documentation accurate. All documentation damning. You begin the work of organizing them for presentation. Not falsification. Organization. If you are going to defend clinical decisions, the narrative must be clear. Admission date, initial presentation, treatment provided, outcome to date. Let the facts speak. The facts will not be enough, you know this. But they are all you have. Outside, a vehicle engine starts somewhere in the distance. Convoy moving up. The ward does not wait for inspections to conclude. You turn to the next file. The ward is never fully silent, but at 4 o'clock it reaches its closest approximation. 30 men sleeping, or attempting sleep. The orderly's footsteps on the duckboards between beds, the canvas tent walls shifting in the wind. You walk the length of the ward because you cannot remain at the desk any longer, and because seeing them helps clarify what is actually at stake in the paperwork. Private Catchpole is awake. You see this before he speaks. His eyes are open and focused on the tent ceiling, his breathing controlled, his hands resting on the blanket in the specific stillness of someone actively preventing movement. You stop at his bedside. Can't sleep? No, sir. His voice is quiet, not whispering. There is no need for stealth, but modulated to avoid waking others. Kept thinking about the inspection. You do not ask how he knows. Information travels through a military unit like water through sand. Soldiers always know. The inspection is my problem, not yours, you say. Respectfully, sir, if they close the unit because of me, they won't close the unit because of you. The statement is not precisely true, but you say it anyway because he needs to hear it. They will close the unit because administrative policy conflicts with clinical reality. That conflict predates your arrival. He does not look reassured. I've been here 6 weeks. Yes. The regulation says 3 days. Yes. Silence. Somewhere across the ward someone coughs. The sound is wet and ragged. Residual gas damage, probably. Wrong unit for that. He should be at the respiratory ward. But those beds are full, so here he sleeps. Sir, Catchpole says. His tone has changed. Careful now, measuring words. If you need to transfer me to make the numbers work. I don't make decisions based on numbers working. You keep your voice level. I make decisions based on clinical assessment. You're not ready for duty. When you are, I'll document that. Until then, you stay. But if the inspector... Let me worry about the inspector. You see him processing this. The arithmetic of self-sacrifice against authority. He wants to volunteer for transfer, to protect the unit. He does not understand that his transfer would accomplish nothing except confirming that clinical judgment can be overruled by regulatory convenience. Private, you say. You were sent here because the front line broke you. Not a moral failure. Not malingering. Simple mechanical reality. Put a man under enough sustained stress, and his nervous system stops functioning reliably. We kept you here because you needed time to stabilize. That time is nearly complete. Another week, maybe 2, and you'll be ready. 2 weeks puts us past the inspection by... I know the timeline. You do not let him finish. Your job is to continue recovering. My job is to ensure the conditions exist for that recovery. Willoughby's arrival does not change those jobs. He looks at you. Really looks, the kind of eye contact men avoid in the army because the hierarchy forbids it. Then he nods once and shifts his gaze back to the ceiling. You move on. 4 beds down, Corporal Davies is asleep, but his hands are clenched around the blanket edge. Nightmare or dream, you cannot tell. You watch for 10 seconds. His breathing stays even. You continue. The orderly, Private Hayes, is standing at the far end of the tent near the supply cabinet. He has a mug of tea that has gone cold, and a logbook open to today's page. When you approach, he straightens slightly. Quiet night, he says. so far. You glance at the logbook. Meal counts, medication distribution, 2 nightmare episodes resolved without incident. Standard. You were in the briefing. Questions now that you've had time to think. Hayes pauses. Just one, sir. If we're keeping good care of them, why does the regulation assume we're not? It is a better question than most officers ask. The regulation assumes that forward units lack the expertise and resources for extended psychiatric care, you say. It assumes that men either recover quickly or require specialist intervention we cannot provide. It assumes the system works cleanly. Does it? No. You do not soften this. But the people writing the regulations have never worked in a forward clearing unit. They see numbers on reports. They see units that hold men past guidelines. They do not see the men. Hayes nods slowly. He is 23 and has been an orderly for 7 months. Before that he was a stretcher bearer. He understands the gap between policy and ground truth. Sir, he says, what happens if they close us? Then 30 men currently receiving care get transferred to facilities that are already over capacity, and future casualties get held for 72 hours before being sent back to the line or transferred to base hospitals 3 days away. The system continues. It just stops pretending to care about outcomes. The honesty surprises him. You see it in his face. Officers do not usually speak this plainly to enlisted men. That's not going to happen, you add. We're going to present accurate documentation and defend the clinical decisions. Willoughby has authority, but he also has a reputation to maintain. If we demonstrate that our outcomes are better than the regulation assumes, he may choose not to act. And if he doesn't choose that, then we lose. You meet his gaze. But we lose honestly, with every file documented correctly, and every treatment decision defensible. I will not falsify records to satisfy administrative convenience. Hayes nods again. Understood, sir. You leave him to his logbook and walk back toward the tent entrance. The sky beyond the canvas is still dark, but the quality of darkness has changed. Pre-dawn. The day arriving whether you are ready or not. In 90 minutes, Willoughby's convoy will cross the last checkpoint. In 2 hours he will walk into the medical tent and begin the audit. Everything you have built here, the treatment protocols, the extended care model, the quiet proof that traumatized men can stabilize if given time, will be measured against a directive written by people who have never touched a patient. You step outside. The air is cold and damp. The artillery rumble continues, unchanged. 3 miles north, the war proceeds without interest in administrative inspections. Captain Aldous Pierce emerges from the officers' tent, already dressed, his uniform buttoned correctly despite the hour. He sees you and approaches. Files ready, he asks. Organized, not ready. You do not pretend otherwise. Willoughby will find discrepancies. The question is whether he'll accept the clinical justification. And if he doesn't, then we find out whether General Headquarters values psychiatric outcomes or regulatory compliance. You pause. My money is on compliance. Pierce almost smiles. Almost. Mine too. He stands beside you, both of you watching the horizon lighten by degrees. No more words needed. You have worked together long enough to communicate through presence. The day begins. 16 hours remain. The file sits on the desk where you left it at 4:30. Private Thomas Catchpole, age 19, 3 weeks mute, regimental records intact, except for the gap where the court-martial documentation used to be before someone removed it. The private notes describe mutism following exposure to prolonged artillery bombardment, and witnessing multiple casualties in close quarters. The official register records not yet diagnosed nervous, admitted October 1st, current status unchanged. Willoughby will ask about him. Men held 3 weeks past regulation are exactly what he is looking for. You could transfer him to the base hospital at Etaples before dawn. The paperwork exists. The convoy leaves at 6 o'clock. By the time Willoughby arrives tomorrow morning, Catchpole would be someone else's documentation problem, and the facility's retention numbers would improve by 1. The argument for transfer is clean. The man has not improved. The regulation says 72 hours maximum at forward clearing units. You have kept him 21 days. The directive is explicit about this. The argument against transfer is that Etaples has 400 patients and 6 doctors, none of whom specialize in psychiatric cases, and their standard treatment protocol for persistent mutism is discharge to duty after 1 week of rest regardless of symptoms, because they need the beds. You open the register to Catchpole's page. The entries are careful, each day recorded in language that describes observable behavior without interpretation. October 1st. Patient presents mute, responsive to non-verbal instruction. October 8th. No verbal communication, follows routine without resistance. October 14th. Condition unchanged. Patient assists with ward tasks when directed. Nothing in the register explains why you have kept him this long. Your private notes explain it. 3 separate observations of Catchpole flinching at sudden sounds. 1 incident of acute distress when another patient raised his voice. Consistent pattern of avoiding any situation requiring speech, even when cooperation would clearly benefit him. The notes describe a man whose silence is not a choice. The notes also describe your assessment that forced return to duty would result in either desertion or complete psychological collapse within 72 hours of reaching the line. Willoughby will not care about your assessment. He will care about the regulation and whether you followed it. The lamp flickers. Outside, the artillery maintains its distant percussion. 37 men breathing in the ward, and you are deciding which ones stay documented and which ones disappear into the morning convoy before the inspection begins. You could rewrite Catchpole's register entries. Change the admission date from October 1st to October 12th. That would bring him inside the regulation window. The convoy manifests from early October are already filed at division headquarters where Willoughby cannot access them easily, and Marsh has demonstrated he understands which documents need to be lost before certain questions get asked. The lamp steadies. You pull a blank page from the drawer and begin writing the transfer order for Etaples. Your handwriting remains level. The form requires patient name, current diagnosis, reason for transfer, receiving facility, and authorizing signature. You fill each field with the appropriate institutional language. Medical condition requires specialist assessment not available at forward clearing unit. Transfer to base hospital Etaples for continued observation and treatment. The form is complete. It needs only your signature to become operational. You set it aside and return to the register. Catchpole's entries remain factual. They describe what you observed. They do not describe what you concluded from those observations, because conclusions are not permitted in the official documentation. Marsh appears at the tent entrance at 22:40. He does not knock. Convoy manifest for tomorrow, sir, he says. 6 transfers pending your authorization. You hand him the Etaples form. He reads it without expression, then looks at the register still open on the desk. Private Catchpole, sir? Yes. Marsh places the form with the others in his folder. His face does not change. The base hospital will have him back on a train to the depot within 10 days, sir. I know. Regulation compliance improves if he transfers before the inspection begins. I know that too. Marsh waits. He has worked in medical administration for 11 years. He understands that sometimes an order given is not the order that should be followed. You close the register. The sound is louder than it should be in the quiet tent. Hold the Catchpole transfer, you say. Process the other 5. Marsh removes the form from his folder and sets it on your desk. Yes, sir. He leaves without further comment. The form sits where he placed it. You could still sign it. The convoy does not leave for 7 hours. Catchpole would be gone before dawn, and your documentation problem would be solved in the way regulations prefer, by moving the evidence somewhere else. You tear the form in half and drop it in the basket beside the desk. Catchpole stays, which means his file needs work that makes 19 days look like 9. Or you need an explanation that survives contact with Willoughby's checklist tomorrow morning. The artillery continues its rhythm, the lamp burns steady. 16 hours remain, and you have just decided that regulatory compliance matters less than what happens to a 19-year-old man who has not spoken in 3 weeks. The tent canvas shifts in the wind, you reach for the next file. 15 hours now. The list sits beside Catchpole's file. 14 names. 14 men held past the 72-hour regulation. The shortest stay is 6 days. The longest is 4 weeks. Each one kept because the clinical judgment was clear, and the alternative was worse. Willoughby will arrive with his checklist at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. He will ask to see the register. He will compare admission dates against current occupancy. He will find these 14 names, and he will ask why they are still here. You need an answer that uses his language. The problem is not whether the decisions were correct. The problem is that correct clinical decisions do not appear in the official documentation, because the official documentation is not designed to contain clinical reasoning. The register records observable facts: diagnosis, date of admission, daily status, disposition. It does not record why a man who appears calm in the ward will fracture entirely if returned to the line. It does not record the assessment that 6 more days of structured routine might be the difference between recovery and permanent collapse. The register records none yet diagnosed nervous, condition unchanged, no improvement noted. Which looks, to an administrator reviewing retention statistics, like failure. You pull the register across the desk and open to the first name on the list. Private J. Millward, admitted September 24, 18 days ago. The entries describe a man who sleeps poorly, startles at sudden sounds, has difficulty maintaining attention during routine tasks. The private notes describe flashbacks, hypervigilance, acute distress when exposed to stimuli resembling frontline conditions. The assessment is clear. Premature return to duty will result in immediate psychological decompensation. The register does not contain the assessment. The register contains: patient reports disturbed sleep, responsive to verbal redirection, participates in ward routine. To Willoughby this reads as malingering given extended accommodation. You could rewrite the entries. Add clinical language that justifies extended retention, but clinical language is precisely what the August directive forbids. Because acknowledging psychiatric injury as a legitimate medical condition creates liability the Army does not want to carry. The directive requires that men presenting with psychological symptoms be diagnosed as not yet diagnosed nervous, and evacuated within 72 hours to units where they become someone else's documentation problem. The directive does not care whether evacuation is clinically appropriate. The directive cares about maintaining troop strength and limiting medical pensionable conditions. You move to the next file. Lance Corporal T. Henshaw, admitted September 28, 14 days. Private R. Yates, admitted September 29, 13 days. Each file tells the same story. Clinical need for retention, documentary appearance of regulatory violation. The lamp flickers, the oil is low. You make a note to requisition more before the inspection, then cross it out. Lamp oil is not the problem that needs solving in the next 15 hours. The problem is arithmetic. 14 men times however many days over regulation equals a number Willoughby will use to demonstrate that this facility is being operated outside institutional compliance. He will not ask why the men were kept. He will ask why the regulation was ignored. And when you explain that the regulation produces worse outcomes than the violation, he will note your statement in his report. as evidence of unwillingness to follow directive guidance during wartime. Captain Aldous Pierce could explain it better. Pierce works at the psychiatric facility at Maghull, where they are permitted to conduct actual treatment and track actual outcomes. Pierce has published papers on effective intervention duration for acute stress reactions. His data shows that men retained 7 to 10 days demonstrate 60% better return to duty rates than men evacuated within 72 hours. Willoughby is not interested in Pierce's data. Willoughby is interested in whether the paperwork matches the directive. You close the register and pull out a blank sheet. At the top you write, Clinical Justification for Extended Observation, Compliance Review, October 1917. Then you stop. Justification is the wrong word. It suggests the regulation was violated and requires defending. What you need is language that makes the retention look like the regulation was followed in spirit, while the letter was temporarily adjusted for field conditions. You cross out the heading and try again. Documentation of medical holding decisions. Forward clearing station number 4. Better. Neutral. Administrative. You begin writing. For each name on the list, you draft a paragraph that translates clinical reasoning into institutional language. Private Millward's flashbacks become ongoing assessment for appropriate disposition required additional observation period to ensure safe evacuation routing. Lance Corporal Henshaw's acute distress becomes medical condition presented evolving symptoms requiring extended diagnostic clarification prior to transfer. The language is bloodless. It is also accurate enough to survive a checklist review, assuming Willoughby does not push past the summary into the underlying clinical details. You are halfway through the 14th entry when Marsh returns at 23:20. Orderly reports Private Yates is asking for you, sir, he says. You look up from the desk. Yates, the file says he has not initiated conversation in 9 days. Yes, sir, he is asking now. You set down the pen and follow Marsh into the ward. The ward is quiet. Most of the men are asleep or pretending to be. The stove at the center has burned down to coals. Private Yates sits upright on his cot near the back, hands folded in his lap, staring at the tent wall. You approach and crouch beside the cot so your face is level with his. Private Yates. He does not look at you. His voice is barely audible. They are sending me back, sir. No one is sending you anywhere tonight. I heard the names. Convoy at 6. You are not on the convoy list. Yates finally turns his head. His eyes are red. Then where am I going, sir? You meet his gaze and keep your voice level. You are staying here until you are ready to leave. That is all. The regulation says 3 days, sir. I know what the regulation says. It has been 13 days, sir. I know that too. Yates looks back at the tent wall. His hands remain folded. What happens when the inspector comes? You do not answer immediately. The tent canvas shifts in the wind. Somewhere outside, a truck engine turns over and dies. The stove ticks as the metal cools. What happens, you say finally, is that I explain why you are still here, and then we continue. Yates nods once. He does not look reassured. He lies back on the cot and pulls the blanket to his chest. You return to the office. The draft document sits where you left it. 14 names translated into institutional language that might survive tomorrow morning. You sign the bottom of the page and place it on top of the register. Then you pull Catchpole's file back across the desk and begin drafting the explanation for why a 19-year-old man who has not spoken in 3 weeks is not a regulatory failure but a clinical priority. The lamp oil is nearly gone. You work by the last of the light, and when the flame finally dies at 0:10, you continue writing in the dark by muscle memory until the sentences are complete. Outside, the artillery maintains its count. 15 hours remain. The 14 files are stacked beside the register. Tomorrow morning, Willoughby will arrive and ask his questions. You have prepared answers that use his language, while protecting the decisions that matter. Whether the answers will be enough is not something you can control. You return the pen to its holder and close the final file. 14 hours. The office is dark except for the moonlight through the tent gap. You light a candle, lamp oil is gone, and pull the master register toward you. 43 names currently recorded as present. 14 held past regulation. 29 within the window. The arithmetic is clean until Willoughby asks why the 14 exist at all. You turn to the convoy manifests from September. 6 convoys departed in the last 4 weeks. Each manifest lists transfers out, names, dates, destinations. You cross-reference against the register. 3 men listed as transferred to Etaples on September 18th were actually held until September 24th before moving to a different facility entirely. The manifest does not reflect the extended stay because Marsh filed the transfer paperwork on the 18th but delayed executing the movement order until clinical assessment was complete. This is the kind of discrepancy Willoughby will find if he looks closely. You make a note on a separate page. Reconcile convoy manifests against register entries. Explain 6-day gap as administrative processing delay due to transport availability. The explanation is thin. It is also the best available option that does not involve rewriting the manifests entirely, which would require accessing the copies already filed at division headquarters. You move to the next document, the daily census report sent to medical services each morning. The census reports total occupancy but do not list individual names. You compare the September census totals against the register. The numbers match. No one has been hidden from the official count. Every man in the ward appears in the documentation. The problem is not that men are missing from the records. The problem is that the records show exactly how long they have been here. You pull the August directive from the folder and read it again. The language is unambiguous. Forward clearing stations are designated for initial assessment and stabilization only. Patients diagnosed with nervous conditions will be evacuated to base hospital facilities within 72 hours of admission. Retention beyond 72 hours is permitted only when evacuation is prevented by enemy action or transport unavailability. Neither exception applies to the 14 men on your list. They are here because you kept them. And you kept them because sending them forward would have been clinically catastrophic. The directive does not recognize clinical catastrophe as a valid exception. You set the directive aside and reach for the private notes. These are the documents that contain the actual clinical reasoning. Observations of affect, descriptions of symptoms, assessments of deterioration risk, projections of likely outcomes under different disposition scenarios. The private notes describe what the register cannot. They also describe what Willoughby is not permitted to see, because showing him the private notes would be admitting that you are conducting psychiatric treatment at a unit designated for holding only. The candle flame wavers. Outside, someone coughs in the ward. The sound is sharp in the quiet night. You wait until it subsides, then return to the documents. The August directive was written by Lieutenant Colonel Hugh Willoughby. His name appears at the bottom as the authorizing signature. He drafted the policy, he implemented the enforcement structure, and now he is arriving to verify compliance at the facilities most likely to be violating it. He has closed 3 units in 4 months. Each closure was justified by retention rates exceeding regulatory limits. Your retention rate is currently 33% over regulation. You pull a blank page and begin calculating what the rate would need to be to survive scrutiny. If you transferred the 6 men closest to the 72-hour mark tomorrow morning before Willoughby arrives, the rate drops to 18% over regulation. If you reclassified 4 men as medical rather than psychiatric cases and moved them to the medical ward, the rate drops to 9%. 9% is defensible as administrative variation. 33% is institutional non-compliance. You write the 6 names on the transfer list, then cross them out. Each man on that list is here because premature evacuation would result in worse outcomes. Moving them to improve a statistic does not change the clinical reality. You try the reclassification approach instead. Which 4 men could be plausibly documented as medical cases rather than psychiatric? You review the files. Private Dalton has a shoulder injury that has not healed properly. Possible reclassification as orthopedic. Lance Corporal Morris complained of persistent headaches last week. Possible reclassification as neurological pending specialist assessment. You are halfway through drafting the reclassification justification when you realize what you are doing. You are lying. Not creatively interpreting regulations or strategically timing documentation, lying. Dalton's shoulder injury is minor, and not the reason he is being held. Morris's headaches are a symptom of his psychological state, not a neurological condition. You tear the page in half and drop it in the basket. The candle burns lower. The wax pools at the base. You have been working for 6 hours straight, and the only conclusion you have reached is that the documentation cannot be made to match the directive without either lying or transferring men who should not be transferred. Which means the answer Willoughby receives tomorrow will be the truth. You violated the regulation because following it would have produced worse outcomes. And you are prepared to defend that decision using clinical reasoning even though clinical reasoning is not a defense the directive recognizes. You close the register and stack the files in order, the master register on top, the 14 individual files beneath it, the convoy manifests and census reports in a separate folder, the private notes locked in the drawer where they will remain, unless Willoughby explicitly demands them. At 1 o'clock you extinguish the candle and step outside. The sky is clear, the moon is half full, the artillery has gone quiet for the first time in hours. Somewhere to the east, a flare rises and falls, briefly illuminating the ridgeline before fading to darkness. 14 hours remain. The files are organized. The explanations are prepared. What happens tomorrow depends on whether Willoughby is interested in clinical outcomes or regulatory compliance. You return to the tent. The candle is still warm. You do not relight it. You sit in the darkness and listen to the men breathing in the ward, and you wait for dawn. The files are aligned. Every entry matches the directive's language. Every retention date falls within regulation, or carries documentation that explains the variance in terms General Headquarters will accept. You sit at the desk in the medical tent at 2:30 and run the audit one final time. 14 men held past 72 hours. Each file contains a transfer request pending specialist assessment. Dated within regulation window. Approved by Pierce as administrative officer. The forms are correct. The signatures match. The dates create a paper trail that justifies continued presence without claiming authority you do not possess. 6 files previously documented using prohibited terminology now carry only the permitted language. Not yet diagnosed nervous. Awaiting specialist evaluation. Transferred to base hospital pending capacity. The clinical observations remain in your private notes, which are not subject to audit, and which will remain in your quarters during Willoughby's inspection. Private Thomas Catchpole's files sit separate from the others. 3 weeks mute. Regimental records intact except for the gap where court-martial documentation used to exist before someone removed it. You have documented his condition as acute mutism following undefined trauma. Recommended for specialist psychiatric assessment, pending transfer to Craiglockhart when capacity permits. Dr. W.H.R. Rivers is working there now, applying methods that treat speech as something earned back rather than commanded into existence. The waiting list is 11 weeks long. The gap in Catchpole's service record is not mentioned anywhere in the file you will present to Willoughby. You cannot document what you do not officially know. The absence of court-martial records is an administrative matter for his regiment to address, not a clinical concern requiring your notation. This is the version of reality that survives inspection, clean documentation, appropriate language, every decision justified by regulation rather than clinical judgment. You close the final file and place it with the others. The work is complete, 48 hours compressed into alignment with institutional requirements. Every vulnerability identified, assessed, and addressed through documentation that protects the facility's operational status, while maintaining the clinical space necessary to continue treatment. The tent canvas shifts in the wind. Artillery throbs in the distance, rhythmic and constant. The ward beyond the canvas wall holds 37 men sleeping under blankets that smell of carbolic and wool. Willoughby's staff car left the railhead at midnight. 6 hours on roads that turn to mud when it rains, which it did, heavily, between 2200 and 1 o'clock. He arrives at dawn, 6 hours from now. You stand and walk to the ward entrance. Marsh is on night duty, sitting on the camp stool near the stove. He straightens when you approach but does not stand. "All quiet," he says. "Good. Files ready?" "Yes." Marsh nods once. His face shows nothing. 23 years in the army. He has survived more inspections than you have conducted medical rounds. "He'll find something," Marsh says. "They always do." "Probably." "What he finds won't be what matters, sir. It'll be whether what he finds gives him grounds to close us." You look past him to the rows of cots. Most of the men are asleep. 2 are awake, sitting up, staring at nothing in particular. One of them is rocking slightly forward and back, a motion so small it barely registers in the lamplight. "We've done what we can," you say. "Yes, sir." You return to the medical tent. The files sit stacked on the desk, ready for review, every page documented according to regulation, every diagnosis phrased in language the institution permits. Every retention justified by process rather than clinical necessity. The assumption embedded in the August directive is simple. Forward psychiatric facilities exist to rapidly assess and return men to duty, not to provide extended treatment. 72 hours is sufficient to distinguish between temporary stress reaction and genuine psychiatric breakdown requiring specialist care. Any officer keeping men longer is either clinically incompetent or institutionally undisciplined. The assumption does not account for the reality that some men need 4 days to sleep without waking at every distant sound, or that a week of safety can make the difference between recovery and permanent collapse, or that transferring a man before he is stable enough to survive the journey often means sending him somewhere worse than the place that broke him. Willoughby's career depends on proving the assumption is correct. Your position depends on surviving his proof. He closed 3 facilities in 4 months. The officers commanding those units are now serving as regimental medical officers, conducting sick parades and treating trenchfoot. Their psychiatric work ended by documentation that failed to satisfy institutional requirements. You sit at the desk and wait for dawn. The lamp flickers. Outside, the wind carries the sound of trucks moving supplies toward the line. Somewhere in the darkness, men are digging or walking or lying awake, counting the hours until they are required to advance again into the machinery that breaks them systematically and with great efficiency. The files remain stacked in perfect alignment. You do not open them again. The staff car arrives at 6:07, 3 minutes ahead of schedule. You are standing outside the medical tent when it pulls through the gate. Pierce is beside you, uniform pressed, boots clean despite the mud. Marsh is at the ward entrance. The morning is cold and still, the sky grey with low cloud. The car stops. The door opens. Lieutenant Colonel Hugh Willoughby is 53 years old, and looks like a man who has spent 26 years behind a desk learning to measure competence by documentation compliance. His uniform is immaculate, his face is neutral, he carries a leather dispatch case and a clipboard with forms already attached. He does not salute. You are the same rank, but he carries audit authority from General Headquarters, which makes the formal courtesy optional. You salute anyway because it costs nothing and establishes that you understand the hierarchy. "Captain," he says. "Lieutenant Colonel Willoughby, Inspector General Medical Services." "Sir." "Captain Medical Officer." "This is Captain Aldous Pierce, Administrative Officer, and Warrant Officer Marsh, Senior Ward Staff." Willoughby's eyes move across each of you in turn. His expression does not change. "I will require access to all patient files, facility registers, transfer documentation, and supply requisitions for the period June through October 1917, he says. "I will conduct ward inspection at 8 o'clock. I will interview staff and selected patients as necessary. My assessment will be complete by 1800 today." "Understood, sir." The August directive is clear regarding terminology and retention duration. My review will assess compliance with both provisions. Variances require documented justification. Administrative errors require correction. Clinical errors require reassignment. "Yes, sir." Willoughby glances toward the ward tent. 37 men inside. 14 held past regulation. 6 previously documented using language the Army banned. "How many patients currently on site?" he asks. 37, sir." "Average retention duration?" 4.2 days, sir." "Regulation maximum is 3 days unless transfer capacity is unavailable." "Yes, sir." 14 patients currently exceed that duration. Each file contains transfer request documentation pending specialist assessment availability. Willoughby makes a notation on his clipboard. His handwriting is small and precise. "I will review those files first," he says. "Captain Pierce, you will provide administrative context for transfer delays. Warrant Officer, you will prepare the ward for inspection. Captain Medical Officer, you will accompany me to review documentation." "Yes, sir." He turns and walks toward the medical tent without waiting for acknowledgement. You follow. Pierce remains outside. Marsh returns to the ward. Inside the tent, Willoughby sets his dispatch case on the desk and opens it. The interior is organized with military precision. Forms separated by category, regulations printed on cardstock, audit checklists arranged in sequence. He does not sit. He stands at the desk and looks at the stacked files. "These are the 14 exceeding regulation duration?" he asks. "Yes, sir." He opens the first file. Private William Moss, 12 days on the ward. Documented as not yet diagnosed nervous. Transfer requested to base hospital psychiatric unit, pending capacity confirmation. Willoughby reads in silence. His face shows nothing. He turns pages methodically, checking dates against regulation requirements, comparing documentation language against directive compliance. After 3 minutes, he closes the file and opens the second. You stand at attention and wait. The artillery throbs in the distance. The tent canvas moves slightly in the wind. Outside, the ward is waking. Men stirring. Marsh conducting morning round. The ordinary sounds of a facility that has survived 19 months by maintaining the appearance of institutional order, while providing the clinical care that keeps men breathing. Willoughby reads without comment. His pen moves across the clipboard, making notations you cannot see. The next convoy is due at noon, carrying supplies and the week's mail. It will leave at 1400 with whatever transfers you authorize. Willoughby knows this. His inspection schedule allows him to observe the convoy loading, to verify that transfer documentation matches the physical movement of patients, to confirm that the facility operates as regulation intends, rather than as clinical necessity requires. The inspection has begun. Willoughby works through the files in silence for 40 minutes. Each one opened, read, and closed. each notation on his clipboard adding to an assessment you cannot see, but can feel building like pressure before a storm. He finishes the 14th file and sets it aside. Then he looks at you directly for the first time since entering the tent. Administrative justification is consistent, he says. Transfer requests are appropriately documented. Retention duration variance is explained by capacity limitations at receiving facilities. Yes, sir. However, the volume of transfers requested suggests either systematic overdiagnosis at this facility or systematic undercapacity at specialist units. Both scenarios indicate institutional failure. You say nothing. There is no response that improves this situation. Willoughby picks up his clipboard and reviews his notations. Average retention at similar facilities ranges between 2.4 and 2.8 days. Your average is 4.2. This variance requires explanation beyond individual transfer delays. Men arrive in various states of acute distress, sir. Some require extended observation to determine appropriate disposition. Premature transfer can result in deterioration during transport. That is a clinical judgment, Willoughby says. The directive was written specifically to limit reliance on forward clinical judgment and ensure rapid return to duty for men experiencing temporary stress reaction. Yes, sir. Your retention pattern suggests you are treating this facility as a convalescent hospital rather than a clearing station. That is not the designated function. He sets down the clipboard and moves to the second stack of files. The general ward population. Men documented appropriately from intake, held within regulation duration, transferred or returned to duty according to process. He opens the first file, reads, closes it, opens the second. The silence extends. Outside voices carry from the ward, Marsh giving instructions. The ordinary rhythm of morning routine continuing while your command authority undergoes assessment. Willoughby pauses on the fifth file. He reads the first page, then turns back to check the intake date against the current date. His expression does not change, but his pen moves across the clipboard with increased pressure. Private Thomas Catchpole, he says. 23 days on site. Documented as acute mutism following undefined trauma. Recommended for specialist psychiatric assessment. Transfer pending capacity at Craiglockhart. Yes, sir. 23 days exceeds regulation by a factor of 7. The transfer request is dated 19 days ago. This suggests either failure to prioritize urgent cases or clinical over-assessment of severity. Private Catchpole has not spoken since intake, sir. He does not respond to verbal commands. He requires assistance with basic self-care. Transfer to a base hospital general ward would result in administrative discharge without treatment. Specialist psychiatric facility is clinically appropriate. Has he been evaluated for malingering? The question hangs in the air like smoke. Yes, sir, you say. Evaluated and excluded. On what basis? Physical presentation inconsistent with voluntary behavior. Absence of secondary gain. Regimental officers confirm combat exposure prior to symptom onset. Willoughby makes another notation. His regimental records show a gap in service documentation for the 2 weeks preceding his transfer to this facility. Gaps of that nature often indicate disciplinary proceedings. I have no information regarding regimental disciplinary matters, sir. My documentation addresses his current clinical presentation and treatment requirements. A court-martial for cowardice would explain both the mutism and the missing records. It would also be a regimental administrative matter outside the scope of medical documentation, sir. Willoughby closes the file. He adds a third notation to his clipboard. This one longer than the previous entries. I will require an interview with Private Catchpole during ward inspection, he says. He does not speak, sir. I am aware. I will assess his presentation directly. Yes, sir. Willoughby returns to the remaining files. The audit continues, each page turned, each date checked. each piece of documentation measured against the standard that defines institutional compliance and professional competence. At 7:40 he closes the final file. Documentation is within technical compliance, he says. Language follows directive requirements. Administrative process is consistently applied. However, the pattern of clinical decision-making suggests interpretation of regulations that prioritizes treatment duration over rapid return to duty. This interpretation is not consistent with General Headquarters' intent. He picks up his dispatch case and removes a printed directive. You recognize it immediately. The August Memorandum. Shell shock terminology prohibited. 72-hour maximum retention. Forward facilities redesignated as clearing stations rather than treatment centers. Paragraph 4. Willoughby says, reading directly from the text, medical officers at forward clearing stations will limit diagnostic assessment to presenting symptoms observable within 72 hours of intake. Cases requiring extended observation will be transferred to base hospital facilities, where specialist assessment can be conducted without compromising the clearing station's primary function of rapid processing. He lowers the document and looks at you. Your retention pattern indicates you are conducting extended observation at a forward facility. That is the function this directive was written to eliminate. Yes, sir. Ward inspection begins in 20 minutes. I will assess whether your clinical judgment regarding individual cases is supported by observable presentation, or whether your facility is systematically retaining men who should be returned to duty. He walks past you toward the tent entrance. You follow him outside. Pierce is waiting. Marsh stands at the ward entrance. The morning light is grey and flat. Men are visible through the ward tent opening, some sitting on cots, some standing near the stove. Willoughby adjusts his cap and turns toward the ward. Captain Pierce, you will accompany me to provide administrative context, he says. Captain Medical Officer, you will present each patient and summarize their clinical status. Warrant Officer Marsh, you will ensure the ward is prepared for inspection. Yes, sir, all three of you say in unison. Willoughby walks toward the ward entrance. You fall in beside Pierce. Marsh enters ahead to give the men warning. The inspection is entering the ward. The files pass technical review. Now the men themselves will be assessed against the standard that measures their worth by how quickly they can be returned to the machinery that broke them. You step through the entrance into the dim warmth of the ward tent, where 37 men wait to be judged competent or deficient by a man who has never treated a single case of what they survive. Willoughby closes the last file at 11:47. His hands rest flat on the stack. 14 files, each one a retention variant documented within regulation, but open to interpretation if someone decides interpretation is required. The silence in the office tent stretches. You can hear canvas moving in the wind outside. The stove ticks as metal contracts. Private Thomas Catchpole, Willoughby says. 3 weeks on the ward. Documentation indicates mutism secondary to combat stress. Transfer to base hospital recommended but not yet executed. Correct, sir. The regimental records show a disciplinary gap. Court-martial proceedings initiated, then withdrawn. No disposition recorded. You do not move. The records reflect what the battalion provided, sir. Willoughby's expression does not change. He opens Catchpole's file again. Reads the entry you wrote 6 days ago, when the convoy was delayed, and you had to justify another 72 hours. The language is precise. Not yet diagnosed nervous. Pending specialist assessment. Mutism consistent with acute stress reaction. No evidence of malingering. The August directive, Willoughby says, requires transfer within 72 hours if specialist treatment is indicated. Private Catchpole has been here 21 days. 3 convoy delays, sir. Weather and road conditions. The manifest. I have reviewed the manifests. Willoughby closes the file. The delays are documented. My concern is whether the clinical presentation justifies extended retention, or whether the absence of disciplinary resolution creates an institutional incentive to classify this case as medical rather than administrative. The tent canvas snaps once in a gust. You keep your hands still. Outside, a motor lorry passes on the road, heading east toward the casualty clearing stations, not west toward the base hospitals. The convoy schedule holds, or it does not. The clinical presentation, you say, is mutism of 3 weeks, duration with no response to standard treatment protocols. The disciplinary gap is a regimental documentation issue. I document what I observe on the ward. And what you observe is a man who cannot speak. Yes, sir. Willoughby makes a notation in his ledger. The scratch of pen on paper is the only sound for 30 seconds. His pen moves with the efficiency of a man who has closed 3 psychiatric facilities in 4 months, and documented the reasons with precision each time. The directive, he says finally, assumes that forward facilities will distinguish between men requiring specialist intervention and men requiring administrative resolution. Private Catchpole presents a documentation problem. If the mutism is genuine, he requires transfer. If the mutism is not genuine, he requires disciplinary action. Your records do not clarify which. You meet his gaze. I document the clinical presentation, sir. Mutism is the clinical presentation. The underlying cause is a question for specialist assessment, which you have recommended. Yes, sir. And which has not occurred because of convoy delays beyond your control. Correct, sir. Another notation. The pen moves faster now. Willoughby has found the gap between regulation and practice. The space where clinical judgment becomes institutional convenience, if someone decides to name it that way. I will require, he says, a written summary of Private Catchpole's treatment course, including all clinical observations and the rationale for continued retention pending transfer. You will provide this by 1800 today. Yes, sir. He closes the ledger, stands. You stand as well. The documentation review will continue this afternoon, Willoughby says. I will inspect the ward at 1400. All patients will be available for observation. Understood, sir. He steps past you toward the tent entrance, pauses, turns back. Captain, he says, the directive exists because the Army determined that forward psychiatric facilities were being used to avoid difficult personnel decisions. Men who should face court-martial were being diagnosed instead. The clinical language was being used as shelter. You say nothing. Your documentation, Willoughby continues, is precise, perhaps too precise. Every entry falls within regulatory tolerance. Every variance carries explanation. This suggests either exceptional clinical judgment or exceptional skill in producing compliant records. The wind pulls at the tent canvas. Somewhere on the ward, a man coughs. The sound carries through 2 layers of canvas and 30 yards of cold air, which means the cough is not improving. I document what I observe, sir, you say. Willoughby holds your gaze for 3 seconds, then nods once and steps through the entrance into the cold. You stand alone in the office tent. The 14 files sit on the desk where he left them. The notation he made in his ledger is not visible from here, but you know what it says. Query retention rationale. Review treatment protocols. Assess documentation compliance. 6.5 hours remain. Catchpole's file survives if the summary you write convinces Willoughby that the clinical judgment is sound. It does not survive if he decides the judgment is convenient. You have 6.5 hours to prove you kept a mute soldier on the ward because he needed to be kept, not because his battalion wanted him kept. Outside, boots move through mud. Voices carry from the field kitchen. The ward routine continues. 37 men wait for the inspection that will determine whether this facility remains operational. The clock on the ammunition crate reads 11:52. You reach for the pen. The ward at 1400 is as prepared as it can be. Beds are lined, floors swept. The men who can sit upright are sitting upright. The men who cannot are positioned so their stillness looks like rest rather than incapacity. Warrant Officer Marsh stands near the entrance with the duty roster. 2 orderlies wait at the far end near the stove. Willoughby enters without announcement. Moves down the center aisle with the same measured pace he used in the office tent. His gaze tracks left and right, taking in each man, each bed, the spacing between them, the light through the canvas, the temperature, the smell. You follow 3 paces behind, close enough to answer questions, far enough to let him observe without interference. He stops at the 4th bed. Private Andrews, 7 days on the ward, acute anxiety reaction following artillery bombardment. The file notes tremor, insomnia, startle response. Andrews sits with hands folded, gaze forward. The tremor is present but controlled. He has learned to breathe through it. Private Andrews, Willoughby says. How are you feeling today? Better, sir. The voice is steady. Andrews has been coached. Not by you. Marsh handles that kind of preparation. But the effect is the same. He knows what to say. And your sleep? Improved, sir. Willoughby makes a notation, moves on. The next 3 beds receive similar attention. Brief questions, short answers, notations in the ledger. You provide no commentary unless asked. This is observation, not interrogation. Willoughby is measuring the gap between what the files claim and what the ward shows. He reaches Catchpole's bed at 1423. Catchpole sits with his back against the wall, knees drawn up, hands loose in his lap. His gaze is fixed on the middle distance. He does not react to Willoughby's approach, does not shift position when the lieutenant colonel stops beside the bed. Private Catchpole, Willoughby says. No response. Willoughby glances at you. You step forward. Private Catchpole has not spoken since admission 3 weeks ago, sir. He responds to direct commands with physical compliance, but does not initiate interaction, and has shown no verbal response to treatment. Willoughby turns back to Catchpole. Private, I am Lieutenant Colonel Willoughby, Inspector General of Medical Services. Do you understand me? Catchpole's gaze does not move. His breathing remains steady. There is no indication he has heard the question. Willoughby waits. 10 seconds. 20. Then makes a notation and moves to the next bed. The inspection continues. 37 men observed. 37 notations made. By 15:10, Willoughby has completed the circuit. He returns to the center of the ward, ledger closed, expression neutral. Captain, he says, a word in private. You follow him outside. The air is cold and still. Clouds lie low over the ridge to the east. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the 72-hour regulation is being enforced at a dozen other facilities. Men transferred before they are stable. Beds emptied to meet the directive regardless of clinical need. Your treatment protocols, Willoughby says, describe them. Standard rest and stabilization, sir. Hot food, clean bedding, removal from frontline stressors. Observation for 72 hours. Men showing improvement return to their units. Men showing no improvement or deterioration transfer to base hospital for specialist assessment. And the determination of improvement is made by whom? By the medical officer on duty, sir, based on clinical observation and documented symptom progression. Using what criteria? Sleep patterns, appetite, affect, responsiveness to interaction, capacity to follow routine commands. The directive provides guidance on acceptable retention duration. Clinical judgment determines whether that duration is appropriate for each case. Willoughby opens the ledger. Reads something. Closes it again. The men on your ward, he says, present consistently with regulation criteria. Their files document appropriate symptom progression. Their observed condition matches their documented condition. This is either the result of exceptional clinical accuracy or exceptional documentation discipline. You wait. I have inspected 14 psychiatric facilities in the last 6 months, Willoughby continues. 12 showed retention rates inconsistent with directive guidance. Documentation was incomplete, diagnostic terminology was prohibited, transfer recommendations were absent or vague. Those facilities are now under administrative review. The wind shifts. You can smell wood smoke from the field kitchen. Somewhere a door slams, sharp and final, the sound a facility makes when it closes permanently, and the patients are dispersed to units that will not keep them. Your facility, Willoughby says, shows none of those deficiencies. Every file is compliant. Every patient presentation matches documented progression. Every variance carries explanation. He meets your gaze. This troubles me, Captain, not because I believe the documentation is false, I believe it is accurate. What troubles me is the precision required to produce documentation this consistent while operating a forward clearing unit under combat conditions. You hold his gaze. The documentation reflects the clinical reality, sir. Does it? Willoughby's voice remains level. Or does the clinical reality reflect what can be documented within regulatory constraints? The question hangs between you. You do not answer it. The answer would require explaining that clinical reality and documentary reality occupy the same space, only when someone builds the bridge between them, with care, with precision. With the understanding that a man's survival may depend on which word appears, in which line of which form. Willoughby closes the ledger. I will review your summary of Private Catchpole's treatment course when you submit it at 1800. My final determination will follow that review. Yes, sir. He turns toward the staff car waiting near the road, then pauses. The directive, he says, was written because someone at General Headquarters decided that mercy and discipline cannot coexist in a psychiatric facility. You have managed to produce a facility where they appear to coexist. I am here to determine whether that appearance is genuine. He walks to the car without waiting for response. The driver opens the door. Willoughby enters. The car pulls away, tires crunching on frozen mud. You stand in the cold and watch it disappear toward the ridge. Marsh emerges from the ward tent, stops beside you. That went as well as it could, sir, he says. You do not reply. 3 hours and 50 minutes remain. Catchpole's file survives, or it does not. The facility remains operational, or it does not. The wind carries the smell of canvas and smoke, and men breathing in close quarters. You turn back toward the office tent. The summary sits on Willoughby's desk at 1800. 4 pages, single-spaced. Every clinical observation from Catchpole's 3 weeks on the ward, documented in chronological order, with notation of treatment interventions, and observed response. The language is precise, mutism persistent across all observation periods, no verbal response to direct address, environmental stimuli, or therapeutic intervention. Physical compliance with routine commands indicates comprehension without willingness or capacity for speech. Recommendation for specialist assessment unchanged. The final paragraph states what cannot be avoided: extended retention justified by absence of convoy capacity, and clinical determination that patient requires specialist intervention unavailable at forward clearing unit. Disciplinary documentation gap noted but outside scope of medical assessment. Willoughby reads it in silence. You stand on the opposite side of the desk, hands behind your back. Gaze on the map pinned to the tent wall behind him. The map shows the positions as of September. 2 weeks out of date. The line has moved since then. Not far, not decisively, but enough that the map no longer matches the ground. He finishes reading. Sets the pages down. Rests his hands flat on the desk. This summary, he says, reflects appropriate clinical reasoning within the scope of your authority. The retention duration is explained by documented convoy delays. The treatment rationale is consistent with directive guidance. You wait. However, Willoughby's tone does not change. The absence of disciplinary resolution creates an institutional ambiguity. A man who faces court-martial for refusing orders may also present with mutism. Your documentation does not address whether Private Catchpole's silence serves a medical or an administrative function. I document the clinical presentation, sir. The administrative question is not within my scope. No, Willoughby stands. It is within mine. He picks up the summary, folds it precisely, places it inside his leather case. My determination, he says, is that this facility operates in substantial compliance with the August directive. Your retention rates fall within acceptable variance. Your documentation meets regulatory standards. Your treatment protocols align with current guidance. The air in the tent is very still. Outside, a vehicle passes, another convoy heading toward the clearing stations. The sound fades. Willoughby continues. However, he says, I am recommending to General Headquarters that forward psychiatric facilities implement additional oversight procedures for cases involving disciplinary ambiguity. Private Catchpole will transfer to the base hospital at Etaples on the next available convoy, where his case will be reviewed by a specialist board that includes both medical and administrative authority. You nod once. Understood, sir. Your facility will remain operational. I will note in my report that your command demonstrates appropriate clinical judgment under difficult conditions. He closes the case. I will also note that the precision of your documentation suggests institutional pressure to conform to regulatory language, regardless of clinical reality. That observation does not constitute a finding of non-compliance. It is simply an observation. He meets your gaze. The directive exists, he says quietly, because someone decided that mental breakdown is a matter of will rather than injury. You have found a way to operate within that framework while still providing care. I do not know if that makes you an exceptional physician or an exceptional bureaucrat. He picks up his cap from the desk, fits it with mechanical precision. Perhaps both, he says. He walks past you toward the tent entrance, pauses at the threshold. The men on your ward are fortunate, Captain. They have an advocate who understands that documentation is not the same as truth, but that documentation determines what truth survives. The canvas lifts in the wind. Willoughby steps through into the dusk. You remain standing in the empty office. The lamp flickers. Outside, the ward routine continues. 37 men wait for evening meal. Tomorrow another convoy arrives. Catchpole will leave on the transport after that, file intact, silence unbroken. The summary you wrote is now part of Willoughby's report. It will follow Catchpole to Etaples. The board there will read it and decide whether his mutism is injury or refusal. You will not be present for that decision. Marsh enters without knocking. Lieutenant Colonel has departed, sir. Staff car crossed the bridge 10 minutes ago. Thank you, Warrant Officer. The men are asking if the inspection result changes anything. You turn to face him. It changes nothing. The ward operates as it has operated. Convoy schedules remain unchanged. Private Catchpole transfers on Thursday. Marsh nods. Very good, sir. He hesitates. Permission to speak freely, sir. Granted. The lads were worried, sir, about the inspection, about whether the facility would remain open. He pauses. They aren't worried now. You meet his gaze. The lamp throws shadows across his face. Tell them, you say, that the work continues. Same routine, same standards, same care. Yes, sir. Marsh salutes, departs. You are alone again in the office tent. The register sits closed on the corner of the desk. 37 entries for today. Tomorrow we'll have 37 more, or perhaps 38 if the convoy brings new admissions. The count does not change. Men arrive broken. You document the breaking in language the Army accepts. Some men improve. Some transfer. Some return to the line. Private Catchpole will transfer with his silence intact and his file clean. Whether the board at Itaplit determines that silence is injury or refusal is beyond your authority now. You extinguish the lamp, step outside into the October dusk. The ward tent glows faintly from the stove light within. Voices murmur. Someone laughs, brief and quiet. The artillery throb on the horizon has resumed its rhythm. 8 seconds between impacts. You walk toward the ward entrance. Evening rounds begin in 20 minutes. 37 men wait. Tomorrow there may be 38. Willoughby's staff car leaves at 9:45. You watch it from the office tent entrance until the dust settles behind it on the Amiens road. The inspection is complete. The facility remains operational. The documentation survives without alteration. 37 men remain on the ward. Tomorrow there will be 38. You return to the office. The register sits where Willoughby left it, still open to Catchpole's page. You close it and set it on the shelf where it belongs. The leather binding is warm from lamplight and handling. The ward tent stands 30 meters away. Inside, men are waking to their second day after inspection. Some will remember the officers walking through. Most will not. The routine continues regardless. You sit at the desk. The morning report is due at 11 o'clock. Current census, 37. Transfers pending, none. Casualties overnight, none. The numbers are accurate. The institutional record matches observable reality. This is what competence looks like when measured against regulation. Pierce appears in the doorway at 10:15. The convoy arrives at 1400. Ward capacity 42 maximum, 37 current. 5 beds available. Adequate. He nods once and withdraws. The coordination continues. The work does not pause for inspection outcomes. You complete the morning report in 12 minutes. Willoughby's notation system is now incorporated into your documentation practice. Every retention variance carries explicit clinical justification, reference to specific regulation subsections. The August directives language appears in every diagnosis field where it is required. The facility operates within institutional parameters while maintaining clinical function. This is the mechanism you have built. It operates whether Willoughby observes it or not. At 11:30 you walk to the ward tent. The men are seated for midday meal. Catchpole sits third row, second position. His hands rest flat on his knees. His breathing is steady. 3 weeks mute. The documentation records observable progress in capacity for structured routine and reduction in acute distress indicators. The language is precise. It protects nothing while appearing to protect everything. A supply lorry grinds past on the Amiens road. The driver shifts gears badly, and the engine note rises, then falls. Warrant Officer Marsh appears at the tent entrance with the pharmacy inventory. 2 morphine ampules missing from the logged count, he explains. A transfer case, night of the 16th. The notation was entered in the daily log, but not cross-referenced to the monthly pharmaceutical record. You initial the correction. Willoughby would have found this in another 4 hours of inventory audit. He did not stay long enough. You return to the office at 12 o'clock. The afternoon schedule is clear, until the convoy arrives. The lamplight falls across the desk at the same angle it fell yesterday. Outside, someone is digging a drainage trench along the eastern perimeter. The sound of the spade biting clay reaches you in steady rhythm. Functional work. The installation requires maintenance whether inspections occur or not. The register waits on its shelf. Tomorrow you will open it again and record the next admissions in language that satisfies both clinical accuracy and institutional requirement. The work continues. It always continues. This is what you have learned to do. The convoy arrives at 1400, as Pierce predicted. 4 men. 3 with acute presentation, 1 requiring extended observation. You process admissions until 16:30, then return to the ward for evening rounds. The light through canvas is gold now. Autumn evening, settling over the Somme plain. The men are quieter at this hour. Some sleep. Others sit with the particular stillness of those whose thoughts have gone somewhere the body cannot follow. You move down the rows. Each man receives assessment. Respiration steady. Effect appropriate to context. Response to verbal prompts within expected range for current treatment phase. The observations are clinical. The care is not. This is the line you walk. Catchpole is awake. His eyes track your movement as you approach. You sit on the camp stool beside his cot. Good evening, Private. No response. 3 weeks, 4 days. The silence continues. But his gaze is focused. Present. This is the progress the register cannot capture in language Willoughby would accept. You sit with him for 4 minutes. Speaking is not required. Presence is the intervention. The canvas above shifts in a gust of wind. Someone coughs 3 rows back. The evening air carries the smell of cooking fires from the artillery positions to the east. After 4 minutes you rise and continue rounds. The second admission from today's convoy is sitting upright on his cot, staring at his hands. You recognize the pattern. Acute disorientation, first 24 hours. The tremor in his fingers is visible from 2 meters away. You approach slowly. He does not look up. Captain Aldous Pierce will check on you at 2100 hours, you say. The orderly knows to fetch him if you require assistance before then. The man nods once. His breathing is shallow but regular. You note it for the evening report and move on. At 1800 the ward settles for evening meal. The orderlies distribute rations. The men eat in the coordinated rhythm of institutional routine. This is stability. Not recovery. Not cure. But a space where the nervous system can stop interpreting every sound as threat. You return to the office at 1900. The lamp is lit. Paperwork waits. Tomorrow's schedule requires preparation. Outside, the artillery's percussion is louder than yesterday. The bombardment pattern has shifted west. You mark the change in your private notes. The men will hear it tonight. Some will sleep through it, others will not. But for now the day's work is complete. You sit at the desk and listen to the ward tent's distant sounds. 38 men breathing. The wind moving through autumn grass beyond the perimeter. This is the sound of continuation. The facility remains operational. The work goes on. At 2100 you open the register one final time. The day's admissions require closing notation. 4 entries. Each one complete with diagnosis field, treatment plan, and projected disposition. The language satisfies regulation. The clinical reality underneath remains partially documented in your private notes, which will never be inspected because they do not officially exist. This is how the system functions. 2 records, one visible, one hidden, both necessary. The lamp flickers. The wick needs trimming, but you do not pause to adjust it. The final entry takes 6 minutes to complete. Outside, the wind has picked up. Canvas snaps against tent poles in irregular rhythm. The artillery's distant voice continues beneath it, steady and low. You close the register at 21:30. The leather binding is cool now. The lamp has burned low. Outside the office tent, the night has settled completely over the forward area. You rise and walk to the ward tent entrance. Inside, the men are sleeping or close to it. The orderly on night watch nods as you enter. You move quietly between the rows. Catchpole sleeps on his side, hands tucked under his chin. His breathing is even. Tomorrow he will wake and remain silent, and you will document continued observation with notation of stable presentation. The words will satisfy institutional requirement, while the clinical reality continues its own trajectory beneath the language. You return to the office tent at 2200. The day's work is finished. Tomorrow will bring new admissions, new documentation requirements, new translations between what you observe and what you are permitted to record. But tonight, the register is closed, the ward is quiet, 38 men rest under your authority and care. You extinguish the lamp, the darkness is complete. The artillery's distant percussion continues its rhythm. Somewhere in the ward tent a man shifts in sleep. The wind moves through canvas. This is what remains after inspection, after regulation, after institutional requirement. Men breathing, shelter holding, the work continuing into another night. You close your eyes and let the sounds settle into pattern. The day releases its hold. Sleep comes gradually, built from the steady rhythm of breath and distant thunder, and the knowledge that tomorrow the register opens again. But not yet. Not tonight. Tonight there is only the darkness, and the ward's quiet breathing and rest. The lamp burns lower now. The wick has shortened through the evening hours, and the flame holds steady in the stillness that comes after the last round. You sit at the desk with the register closed. The leather cover is warm under your palm. The binding holds its shape after months of daily handling. The pages inside remain intact, each entry complete, each diagnosis recorded in the language that survived inspection, each retention justified within the parameters that kept the facility operational. The ward breathes behind you. 37 men sleep or rest in the darkness, some with ease, some with difficulty. The difference does not change the fact that they remain here tonight, documented and protected by decisions made in the 48 hours before Lieutenant Colonel Hugh Willoughby arrived with his checklist and his mandate from General Headquarters. The orderly moves between the beds without sound. His boots make no noise on the duckboards. His presence is a shadow that checks each man and moves to the next. He does not wake them. He does not speak. He simply confirms that breath continues and posture has not shifted into distress. You watch him work. The lamplight does not reach the far end of the ward, but you know the pattern. Fourth bed from the left, young private who startles at sudden noise. Sixth bed, older sergeant who sleeps on his back with arms at his sides. 10th bed, the man who mutters occasionally but does not wake. Private Thomas Catchpole in the corner bed, silent as he has been for 3 weeks, his file complete now in language that will hold. The artillery has quieted. The distant percussion that marks every hour at this position has faded to intermittent rumble. The guns do not stop entirely. They never stop entirely. But tonight the rhythm has slowed to something almost restful. The air smells of wool and canvas, and the particular staleness that comes from men sleeping in close quarters. Not unpleasant, familiar. The scent of a ward at night after the day's medical work has concluded, and the bodies have settled into whatever rest they can find. The orderly returns to the desk. He nods once. All stable. No intervention required. He takes his position near the entrance where he can see the entire space. You remain at the desk. The lamp burns. The register stays closed. The men breathe in the darkness. Tomorrow there will be new arrivals. Tomorrow the work continues. Tomorrow Captain Aldous Pierce will return from his leave and resume his rounds. But tonight there is only this. The ward at rest. The documentation complete. The facility operational within the regulations that govern forward psychiatric care in October 1917. The flame flickers once. The wick shortens. The light holds. The tea has gone cold in the mug beside the register. You do not remember when you last drank from it. The surface shows no steam. The ceramic holds residual warmth but nothing more. You lift the mug. The weight is familiar. Army issue, thick-walled, the handle slightly too large for comfortable grip. The tea inside, tastes of tannin and metal, and the particular bitterness that comes from leaves steeped too long. You drink it anyway. The ward has settled deeper into night. The breathing patterns have synchronized without conscious coordination. 37 men exhaling at intervals that create a rhythm like distant surf. In, out, pause. In, out, pause. The smell of the ward has changed. Earlier it was wool and canvas and bodies. Now it carries something else. Rest, perhaps. Or simply the absence of waking tension. The men who cannot sleep have stopped fighting it. The men who can sleep have found whatever peace is available in a forward clearing station 3 miles from the line. You set the mug down. The sound is too loud in the stillness. The orderly glances toward you, then away. He does not speak. There is nothing that requires speech. The lamp flame has shortened further. The wick needs trimming, but you do not trim it. The light is sufficient for night duty. Too much brightness would wake the men who sleep lightly. Too little would prevent the orderly from seeing movement that requires intervention. The register sits where you left it, leather binding, 200 pages, every case documented, every retention justified, every diagnosis recorded in language that protected the men while satisfying the regulations that govern their care. The orderly shifts position near the entrance. Not restless, simply adjusting weight from one foot to the other after standing watch for hours. He will remain there until dawn. Then Warrant Officer Marsh will take his place. The rotation continues without interruption. The artillery has quieted to irregular pulse. Thump, long pause, thump, longer pause. The rhythm has no pattern. The guns fire when ammunition arrives and targets present themselves. Between those moments, silence. The smell of tea mingles with canvas and wool. The scents layer without competing. Each occupies its own register. Together they create the particular atmosphere of a psychiatric ward at night, in autumn 1917. You close your eyes, the warmth of the mug seeps into your palms. The breathing continues behind you. The orderly stands watch. The lamp burns lower. The sound of 37 men breathing fills the space between lamp and darkness. No other sound competes. The canvas does not move. The duckboards do not creak. The artillery has paused. In, out, in, out. The rhythm is not uniform. Each man breathes at his own pace. But the combined effect creates a pulse that holds the ward together in the hours before dawn. You sit motionless at the desk, the register beneath your hand. The lamp burning low, the orderly a shadow near the entrance, everything still except the breathing and the slow contraction of the flame. Somewhere a man shifts position. The sound of wool against canvas. A soft exhalation. Then stillness again, then only breathing. The darkness beyond the lamplight is complete. No moon tonight. No stars visible through the canvas gaps. Only the small circle of yellow light around the desk, and the rest of the ward in shadow. The breathing continues. Steady. Unbroken. The sound of men who have found rest, despite everything that brought them here. Dr. W.H.R. Rivers at Craig Lockhart works with officers. You work with other ranks. The method differs, but the breathing sounds the same. Your own breath matches the rhythm without conscious effort, in with the collective inhale, out with the collective exhale, part of the pattern, part of the ward's single organism. The air carries the faint mineral smell of earth beyond the canvas walls. Damp soil, old wood, the particular scent of a place built temporary but inhabited with permanence. The lamp flame shortens, the light dims, the breathing does not change. The lamp gutters. The flame shrinks to ember. The breathing continues in darkness now, 37 men and 1 officer held together by the simple fact of shared air and shared night. The register stays closed. The work is complete. The documentation will survive whatever morning brings. The next convoy will arrive at dawn, but that is hours away still. The forms are ready. The beds will turn over. The system will continue. Your hand rests on the leather cover, warm still. The breathing rises and falls around you like tide. The orderly stands watch in shadow. The artillery is silent. Everything that needed doing is done. Everything that needed recording is recorded. The ward breathes as one body. The night holds. The smell of wool and canvas and sleeping men fills the space. The air is thick with it. Familiar, safe. The smell of rest earned in a place where rest is rare. Your eyes close. The register beneath your palm. The breathing all around. The lamp gone dark. The orderlies still standing watch, though you cannot see him anymore. The whole world sleeping now. The ward, the line, the guns. Everything still except breath. In, out. In, out. You breathe with them. Part of the rhythm. Part of the night. Part of the long, slow tide of men sleeping through war. The darkness is complete. The breathing continues. Everything sleeping.